Hi guys, tonight we travel back to a world that feels almost familiar and yet impossibly distant. Imagine standing beneath a pale dawn sky. The air is cool against your skin. A light wind moves through sparse grasses that stretch across a broad plain. In the distance, mist hangs above a winding river. Beyond it, dark hills rise quietly into the morning light. There are no cities, no roads, no electric glow on the horizon, only the sounds of birds, the rustle of plants, and the steady breathing of a world still recovering from the immense change. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what your local time is right now. Now, dim the lights and allow yourself to drift into a remarkable chapter of human history. You find yourself standing about 11,700 years ago, near the beginning of a new age. The enormous ice age that dominated much of human existence is finally loosening its grip. For countless generations, people have lived in a world shaped by cold temperatures, advancing glaciers, and unpredictable environmental shifts. Now something extraordinary is happening. The climate is changing, not in a single dramatic moment, but through a gradual transformation that will eventually alter nearly every aspect of human life. You take a slow breath. The air feels different from what your ancestors knew. For thousands of years, much of the northern hemisphere experienced conditions that were colder and drier than today. Vast sheets of ice covered enormous portions of North America and northern Europe. Sea levels were much lower. Coastlines sat far beyond their modern positions. A mainstream historical fact is that around 11,700 years ago, the Earth entered the geological period known as the Holocene. This warmer interval followed the end of the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to colder conditions that interrupted the warming trend after the last ice age. As you stand beside the river, however, you know none of these scientific names. You simply experience a world becoming gentler. The winters remain cold, the nights can still be harsh. Yet there is a growing sense of stability. Plants appear in places where they struggled before. Animals begin following slightly different routes. Water flows more reliably through valleys that once endured long periods of freezing. The changes are subtle enough that a single person might barely notice them, but over generations, they become impossible to ignore. You walk across damp ground covered in fresh morning dew. Nearby, a small group of hunter-gatherers is preparing for the day. Their shelters are simple, their tools are crafted from stone, bone, wood, and antler. Smoke rises gently from a fire that has burned through the night. The smell of wood smoke mixes with the scent of wet earth. Someone adjusts a fur cloak. A child watches sparks drift upward into the pale sky. Life here depends entirely on understanding the environment. There are no supermarkets waiting beyond the next hill. No weather forecasts appearing on a phone screen. Every meal depends upon knowledge accumulated across generations. Where do the animals migrate? Which plants can be gathered safely? When do fish return to the rivers? These questions shape daily existence. And yet something remarkable is beginning to happen. The environment itself is becoming more predictable. Not perfectly predictable, of course. Nature always keeps a few surprises in reserve, but compared to the dramatic climate swings of previous millennia, this new world feels increasingly dependable. You continue walking along the riverbank. The sunlight strengthens. Birdsong echoes across the water. Small fish break the surface with quiet splashes. Researchers continue to question exactly how quickly people living at the time recognize these environmental shifts. Some scholars suggest the changes became apparent within a few generations. Others believe the transformation felt so gradual that most individuals simply adapted without fully realizing the scale of what was occurring. Either way, the consequences would be enormous. The river before you serves as a perfect example. As glaciers retreat in distant regions, meltwater feeds many waterways. Some rivers become larger, others establish more stable seasonal patterns. Reliable water encourages the growth of plants and attracts animals. Where water gathers, life follows. Where life gathers, humans often follow too. You crouch beside the edge of the river. The water is cold enough to sting your fingertips. Tiny insects dance above the surface. A gentle breeze carries the scent of reeds. It is peaceful. Yet hidden within this peaceful scene lies the foundation of future civilizations. Not tomorrow, not next year, not even for thousands of years. But the process has begun. A quirky historical tidbit is that some ancient landscapes now buried beneath modern seas were once thriving environments where people hunted, gathered food, and travelled across dry land. Entire regions that are underwater today served as home to human communities during the final stages of the Ice Age. At this moment, however, those coastlines still exist. The seas have not yet reached their modern levels. The map of the world looks different. If you could rise high above the earth, you would see shorelines extending far beyond their current positions. Their plains connect regions that are now separated by water. Future generations will watch those lands slowly disappear beneath rising seas. But that story lies ahead. For now, your attention returns to the people nearby. They move with confidence through their surroundings. Every sound carries meaning. A distant bird call, a shift in the wind, the tracks of animals pressed into soft mud. Knowledge is survival. You watch as several adults prepare to leave camp. They carry spears and tools fashioned through hours of careful work. Their movements are efficient. Nothing is wasted. Energy matters. Resources matter. Time matters. The climate may be becoming more stable, but life remains challenging. A failed hunt can still bring hardship. A severe winter can still threaten survival. And yet opportunities are expanding as temperatures rise. Forests begin spreading into previously barren areas. Grasslands shift. Plant communities change. New resources become available. Some species thrive. Others struggle. Human groups must adapt constantly. Fortunately, adaptation is something humans do exceptionally well. In fact, that ability may be our greatest talent, long before cities, writing, or agriculture. People learn to adjust to changing conditions across deserts, forests, mountains, and frozen plains. Now they face another transformation. This time, however, the changes may ultimately work in their favour. The morning continues to brighten, sunlight sparkles across the river. The camp behind you grows busier as people begin their daily tasks. Some gather fuel, others prepare food. Children explore nearby areas under watchful eyes. The scene feels ordinary, and perhaps that is the most remarkable thing. History often focuses on kings, battles, and monuments. But the true story of humanity is often found in ordinary mornings like this one. A quiet camp, a warming climate, a river flowing steadily through the landscape. Small moments that eventually create enormous consequences without realizing it. You're standing at the threshold of one of the most important environmental transitions our species has ever experienced. The Great Cold Age is ending. A new world is emerging, and with it comes the possibility of entirely new ways of living. You begin walking once more beside the river, following its gentle curve into the brightening day, while the first chapter of humanity's next great journey slowly unfolds around you. The morning gradually unfolds around you as you continue along the river's edge. The camp behind you becomes smaller with every step. Smoke rises in a thin grey column above the shelters before blending into the brightening sky. The sounds of conversation fade. Soon you hear only the whisper of wind moving through grasses and the gentle murmur of flowing water. You are living through a turning point, although nobody around you would describe it that way. There are no calendars marking the occasion, no ceremonies celebrating the beginning of the Holocene. No one announces that a major chapter of Earth's climate history has just ended. Instead, life continues as it always has. People wake, they search for food, they care for children, they repair tools, and yet beneath these familiar routines, the world itself is changing. To understand why this moment matters so much, it helps to look back a little further. For roughly 1,200 years before this warming, much of the Northern Hemisphere experienced an unusual return to colder conditions. Scientists call this period the Younger Dryas, just when the Great Ice Age seemed to be ending. Temperatures in many regions suddenly dropped again. The reasons remain a subject of discussion. Some researchers propose that enormous amounts of fresh water from melting glaciers disrupted ocean circulation patterns. Others suggest more complex combinations of environmental factors were involved. Scholars remain divided on the precise mechanisms, but most agree that the Younger Dryas created a colder and often drier climate across many parts of the world. If you had lived through those centuries, you would have experienced a landscape that could feel unpredictable and challenging. Then, around 11,700 years ago, something remarkable happened. The cold spell ended, and it ended surprisingly quickly in geological terms. A mainstream historical fact is that evidence from Greenland ice cores indicates temperatures rose dramatically at the end of the Younger Dryas, marking the start of the warmer Holocene epoch. Of course, when we say quickly, we're speaking as geologists. The Earth is very good at making even dramatic changes seem leisurely. Still, compared with many ancient climate transitions, this warming was rapid enough to transform ecosystems across vast regions. You climb a gentle slope overlooking the valley. The sun is higher now. Its warmth rests softly on your shoulders. Below, the river winds through patches of grassland mixed with clusters of young trees. This landscape itself is beginning to change. As temperatures increase, forests slowly expand into areas that were once colder and less hospitable to tree growth. In some regions, birch and pine spread first, later. Other species follow. The transformation takes generations, but it gradually reshapes entire continents. You pause beneath a stand of trees. Their leaves rustle quietly overhead. Sunlight filters through branches, creating shifting patterns across the ground. The smell here is rich and earthy, damp soil, fresh vegetation, the faint scent of moss. Such details may seem small, yet they are signs of larger environmental forces at work. A warmer climate allows different plant communities to thrive. New plants attract different animals. Different animals create new opportunities and challenges for human populations. Everything is connected. You continue walking along the edge of the forest. You notice tracks pressed into soft earth. Several deer passed through recently. Perhaps only an hour ago, nearby, birds dart between branches in search of insects. Life appears abundant in many regions. Warming temperatures increased biological productivity. More plants could grow, more animals could find food, more ecosystems became capable of supporting larger populations, not everywhere. Of course, environmental change always creates winners and losers. Some species prosper, others struggle. Human communities must constantly adapt. Fortunately, adaptation is something humans have practiced for a very long time. Long before agriculture, long before cities, long before written language, you are part of a species that learned to survive in deserts, mountains, forests, grasslands, and frozen tundra. Now another adjustment is underway, but this adjustment carries unusual possibilities. You reach a small stream flowing into the larger river. The water trickles over smooth stones with a soothing rhythm. Dragonflies hover above the surface. Tiny fish dart through shallow pools. You kneel and cup cool water in your hands. It tastes fresh and clean. Reliable fresh water will become one of the defining advantages of the coming age. As glaciers retreat and precipitation patterns shift. Many river systems establish more stable flows. Communities begin spending more time near dependable water sources. The significance of this cannot be overstated. When water becomes predictable, many other aspects of life become easier to organize. Food gathering becomes more reliable. Seasonal movements become easier to plan. Population growth becomes more feasible. The foundations of future settlements begin taking shape, not because anyone invents civilization overnight, but because environmental conditions increasingly support longer-term stability. You sit quietly beside the stream. The sunlight sparkles across moving water. A cool breeze brushes your face. The world feels peaceful. Yet hidden beneath that calm surface lies one of history's greatest transformations. A quirky tidbit is that some ancient hunter-gatherers likely witnessed landscapes changing so dramatically over generations that stories about disappearing lakes, shifting rivers, and expanding forests may have been passed down much like family histories. Imagine hearing your grandparents describe a landscape that looked noticeably different when they were young. Perhaps a valley once covered in open grassland now contains dense woodland. Perhaps an animal commonly hunted in previous generations has become less abundant. Perhaps a river follows a slightly different course. These are not dramatic events from one day to the next. They are slow changes, unfolding almost invisibly, and yet they alter the future. You stand and continue your journey. As the day grows warmer, insects hum softly among flowering plants. The landscape feels alive in a way that many Ice Age environments did not. The growing stability of the Holocene will eventually allow human societies to invest energy in things beyond immediate survival, not immediately. That process will take thousands of years, but the seeds are being planted, quite literally, as you will later discover. For now, people remain hunter-gatherers. Their knowledge of wild foods remains essential. Their seasonal migrations continue. Their daily routines are still shaped by nature's rhythms. Yet nature itself is becoming more dependable. Researchers continue to question exactly how much this new climate's stability influenced later cultural developments. Some scholars argue that environmental change created opportunities that humans eagerly embraced. Others emphasize human innovation and social organization as equally important drivers. The debate continues. What remains clear is that the end of the Younger Dryas opened the door to a new environmental chapter, and humanity stepped through it. The afternoon sun now shines brightly across the valley. Birds circle overhead. The river glitters like a ribbon of silver. Behind you lies the colder world of the recent past. Ahead lies a future filled with villages, agriculture, monuments, cities, and civilizations not yet imagined. For the moment, however, none of that exists. There is only the warmth of the day, the scent of growing forests, the steady flow of water, and the quiet realization that the earth has begun to settle into a more welcoming rhythm, one that will shape human history for thousands of years to come. As the warm afternoon continues, you leave the river valley behind and move toward higher ground. The path ahead is not really a path in the modern sense. There are no signs, no fences, and certainly no neatly marked hiking trails. Instead, you follow the contours of the land itself. Generations of people and animals have passed through these areas, leaving subtle traces that only experienced eyes would recognize. The sun hangs comfortably above the horizon. A gentle breeze moves across the landscape. You can smell grass is warmed by sunlight and the faint scent of distant trees. Everything feels calm, yet the land around you is undergoing one of the greatest transformations in its long history. The warming that began with the end of the Younger Dryas is now reshaping entire ecosystems, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. You crest a low hill and pause. From here, you can see miles of countryside stretching into the distance. Some areas are open grassland, others contain patches of woodland. Far beyond, hazy ridges rise beneath the afternoon sky, thousands of years earlier. Much of this region would have looked quite different. During the height of the Ice Age, colder temperatures limited the growth of many tree species. Large areas were dominated by tundra and steppe environments. Vast stretches of land supported hardy grasses, shrubs, and cold-adapted plants. Now those conditions are changing. A mainstream historical fact is that after the last Ice Age, forests expanded across large parts of Europe, Asia, and North America as temperatures rose and precipitation patterns shifted at first glance. That might not sound particularly dramatic. Trees grow, forests spread. Simple enough. But forests are powerful architects of change when trees arrive. Everything else begins to change with them. The amount of shade increases, soil conditions evolve, animal habitats shift. Different plants compete for space. Water is stored and released differently. The entire landscape begins operating according to new rules. You descend the hillside and enter a young woodland. The air immediately feels cooler. Sunlight filters through leaves overhead. Bird calls echo softly among the branches. The forest floor is covered with moss, fallen leaves, and small plants reaching toward patches of light. Your footsteps become quieter. The world feels sheltered here, almost enclosed. For human communities, expanding forests create both opportunities and challenges. Wood becomes more abundant. Fuel for fires becomes easier to obtain. Materials for tools and shelters become more accessible. Certain edible plants flourish beneath woodland canopies. Many animals thrive in forest environments, yet forests can also make travel more difficult. Visibility decreases. Large hunting grounds may shrink. Species that once preferred open grasslands may move elsewhere. Adaptation remains essential, and adaptation is exactly what humans continue to do. You walk between tall trunks while shafts of sunlight dance across the ground. A squirrel darts up a tree. Small birds flutter through the branches. Insects hum lazily in the warm air. It is easy to imagine this forest as timeless, but it is relatively new, at least in geological terms. The trees surrounding you are part of a great migration unfolding across continents. As climate zones shift northward and upward in elevation, plants slowly follow, generation after generation. Forests advance into territories that were once too cold to support them. Nature is constantly on the move, even when it appears still. Researchers continue to question exactly how rapidly some forest expansions occurred in different regions. Evidence varies from place to place, and local environmental conditions often influence the pace of change. What remains clear is that the world of 11,700 years ago was becoming greener in many areas. You emerge from the trees and enter a meadow. Wildflowers sway gently in the breeze. Bees move from blossom to blossom. The afternoon light gives everything a soft golden glow. Nearby, a herd of grazing animals feeds peacefully. Perhaps deer, perhaps wild cattle, perhaps another species adapted to this changing environment. Their presence reminds you that animals are also responding to the new climate. Some thrive, some decline, some move, others disappear entirely from regions they once occupied. One of the most famous examples involves large Ice Age animals, mammoths, giant ground sloths, woolly rhinoceroses, and other remarkable creatures had dominated many ancient landscapes. By the beginning of the Holocene, many of these species were already gone or nearing extinction in numerous regions. The reasons remain complex. Climate change played a role. Human hunting likely contributed in some cases. Different species experienced different pressures. Scholars still debate the precise balance of factors responsible for various extinctions. You glance across the meadow and try to imagine mammoths walking there. Massive bodies covered in shaggy fur, long curved tusks gleaming in the sunlight, an animal that had survived countless generations of Ice Age conditions. Now the world that helped sustain such creatures is fading, and a different world is taking shape. A quirky historical tidbit is that small populations of mammoths survived on isolated Arctic islands for thousands of years after their mainland relatives disappeared, meaning some mammoths were still alive while humans in other regions were already developing increasingly complex societies. History can be wonderfully strange sometimes. Entire worlds overlap in ways we rarely imagine. You continue walking through the meadow. The grass brushes softly against your legs. Clouds drift lazily overhead. The atmosphere feels peaceful. Yet beneath that peace lies continual adjustment. Human groups must learn where animals now travel. They must understand which plants are becoming more common. They must recognize new seasonal patterns. Knowledge remains their greatest resource. Unlike claws, horns, or thick fur, human survival depends heavily upon learning. One generation observes, the next generation remembers. The following generation improves upon that knowledge. This process has been unfolding for tens of thousands of years. Now it becomes especially important as ecosystems change. Successful communities are those capable of adapting their understanding to new realities. You arrive beside a small pond surrounded by reeds. Dragonflies skim the surface. Frogs call from hidden places along the shoreline. The water reflects the sky like polished glass. You sit quietly and listen. This place would have been familiar to ancient people, not because it resembles modern civilization, but because it offers something timeless: fresh water, food, shelter nearby, resources that support life. As climates stabilize, locations like this become increasingly valuable. People begin returning to favorable places more frequently. Certain campsites are used again and again. Seasonal movements continue, but patterns become more predictable. The idea of staying longer in one location gradually becomes more practical. That development still lies ahead. For now, you simply observe the conditions making it possible. The afternoon slowly begins its journey toward evening. The sunlight softens. Long shadows stretch across the meadow. Birdsong changes as different species become active. The air cools slightly. You rise from the pond's edge and continue onward. Behind you, the forests are spreading, the glaciers are retreating. The ecosystems of the Ice Age are giving way to new landscapes. Ahead of you lies a future that no one can yet imagine. Villages, agriculture, monuments, cities, empires. All of them depend, in one way or another, upon the environmental transformations unfolding around you right now. But for this moment, there is only the quiet rustle of grass, the scent of warm earth, and the slow greening of a world learning how to become something entirely new. The afternoon drifts onward, and you continue across a landscape that is becoming increasingly alive with movement. Not the movement of cities or roads. Those are still thousands of years in the future. Instead, you enter a world shaped by migration. Every season brings motion. Animals move, birds move, fish move, and humans move with them. You leave the meadow behind and follow a broad valley stretching toward distant hills. The air carries the scent of sun-warmed grass and damp earth. Above you, clouds drift slowly across a pale blue sky. Somewhere ahead, a herd is traveling. You cannot see it yet, but experienced people living in this era would know the signs. Tracks pressed into soft ground, fresh droppings, broken vegetation, a pattern of movement passed down through generations. For hunter-gatherers, understanding animal migrations is among the most valuable forms of knowledge imaginable. There are no farms, no stored harvests large enough to sustain entire populations year after year. Food comes from the living landscape, and the landscape itself is changing. As temperatures rise following the end of the Younger Dryas, many animal species begin adjusting their ranges. Some move northward, others seek higher elevations. New habitats open while older ones gradually disappear. The result is a constantly shifting map of opportunity. You climb a low ridge and pause. Far below, movement catches your eye. A herd, perhaps wild horses, perhaps deer, perhaps another grazing species common to this region. Dozens of animals move together across the valley floor, their shapes dark against the golden grass. The sight is mesmerizing. For the people of this age, such herds represent food, clothing, tools, and survival itself. A successful hunt can provide meat for many days. Bones may become needles or points. Hides can be transformed into clothing, shelter coverings, and carrying bags. Very little goes to waste. You watch the animals spread across the landscape like a slow-moving river. Research into prehistoric hunting sites reveals just how closely many human communities followed the movements of large animals. Seasonal migration routes often shaped the annual rhythms of entire societies. In a sense, people are reading the land. Every track is a sentence. Every trail is a chapter. Every migration is a story that must be understood. The wind shifts slightly. You hear insects buzzing among nearby plants. A hawk circles overhead. The valley seems peaceful. Yet beneath that calm lies an intricate network of relationships connecting climate, vegetation, animals, and humans. As warming temperatures encourage forests to spread in some regions, open grasslands shrink. That may sound like a simple environmental change, but for grazing animals, it can alter everything. Some species flourish in woodland environments, others depend upon open spaces. As habitats change, migration routes often change as well. Human communities must adapt accordingly. You begin descending toward the valley floor. The ground beneath your feet feels warm from the afternoon sun. Tall grasses sway gently around you. Occasionally you notice animal tracks crossing your path. Some are fresh, others are days old. Each one offers clues. One of the clearest findings from archaeological research is that prehistoric hunter-gatherers possessed an astonishing understanding of animal behavior. Their survival depended upon noticing details that many modern people would easily overlook. Today, many of us rely on maps, weather forecasts, and digital navigation. A person living 11,700 years ago might instead recognize subtle differences in hoofprints, seasonal vegetation, or bird activity. Different tools, same goal, understanding the world. You approach a small stream winding through the valley. The water sparkles beneath the sunlight. Animal tracks crowd the muddy banks. Some are large, others surprisingly small. This place serves as a gathering point. Animals need water. Where animals gather, hunters often gather too. The relationship is almost timeless. You kneel beside the stream and listen. The sound of flowing water mixes with distant bird calls. Dragonflies hover above the surface. The afternoon feels wonderfully still. Yet migration is never far away. Some animals may travel hundreds of miles during seasonal movements. Others follow shorter routes shaped by local conditions. The exact patterns vary across regions and species. Experts continue to discuss how quickly certain migration systems changed after the climate warming began. Some evidence suggests rapid adjustments in particular areas. Other regions appear to have experienced more gradual transitions. Nature rarely follows a single script. Every landscape tells its own version of the story. As you continue along the stream, you notice signs of recent human activity. A fire pit. A few discarded stone flakes left behind during tool-making. Perhaps a temporary camp once stood nearby. Nothing permanent, just a brief stop during a seasonal journey. The people who occupied this place may have remained for a few days or perhaps a few weeks before moving on. Mobility remains essential. The environment is becoming more stable, but resources are still spread across large areas. Hunter-gatherers often travel according to seasonal cycles that maximize access to food. Fish might be abundant during one season, certain plants during another. large game during yet another. Life follows nature's calendar. An intriguing detail from this era is that some prehistoric groups transported valuable stone materials across surprisingly long distances. Archaeologists have discovered stone tools made from rock sources located many miles away from where the tools were eventually used. Even in these early times, human networks could extend far beyond a single valley or region. People shared information, ideas travelled, materials moved. The ancient world was often more connected than we imagine. The sun begins lowering toward the western horizon. Its light becomes softer now, warmer, golden. The grazing herd has moved farther down the valley. Long shadows stretch across the grasslands. You continue walking at an easy pace. The cooling air carries new scents, wild plants, fresh water, distant wood smoke. Perhaps another group has established a camp somewhere beyond the next ridge. As evening approaches, the animals themselves become more active. Birds call from nearby shrubs. Small mammals emerge cautiously from hiding places. Life continues according to rhythms refined over thousands of generations. And those rhythms are now being subtly reshaped by climate. The warming world supports different vegetation. Different vegetation influences animal populations. Animal populations affect human behavior. Every part of the system touches every other part. You stop atop a small rise overlooking the valley one final time. Below, the stream reflects the fading sunlight. The herd appears as dark specks in the distance. The entire landscape glows beneath the approaching evening. It is beautiful, and it is changing. Not through sudden catastrophe, not through dramatic upheaval, but through countless small adjustments accumulating across generations. The people living here cannot yet know where these changes will eventually lead. They cannot foresee agriculture. They cannot imagine cities. They cannot picture monuments of stone rising from the earth. For now, their attention remains fixed on the movements of animals, the seasons, and the land itself. And so you stand quietly beside them in spirit, watching the great herds cross a warming world, carrying humanity one step closer to a future that has not yet been dreamed. The evening light grows softer as you continue your journey across this changing world. The valley behind you slowly fades into shades of gold and amber. The great herd has disappeared into the distance, following routes established long before any human memory. Their movements continue, season after season, across landscapes that are themselves being reshaped by a warming climate. Ahead, the sound of water becomes louder. At first, it's only a faint murmur, then a steady rushing. Then the unmistakable voice of a large river. You move toward it through tall grasses that sway gently in the cooling breeze. The air feels fresh, moist, alive. Water has always been important to human survival. That is hardly surprising. Every living thing depends upon it. Yet during this particular chapter of history, rivers are becoming even more significant than before. As glaciers retreat across large portions of the northern hemisphere, enormous amounts of meltwater enter river systems, lakes form, wetlands expand, new channels appear, ancient waterways change course. The geography of entire regions begins adjusting to the new climate. You reach a rise overlooking the river. The sight is breathtaking. A broad ribbon of water stretches across the landscape, reflecting the colours of the evening sky. Small islands break the current. Reeds line the banks. Waterfowl drift peacefully near the shoreline. The river feels powerful, ancient. Yet it is also part of a world in transition. Evidence preserved in ancient sediments reveals that many river systems experienced major transformations during the early Holocene. Changes in temperature and precipitation influence water flow, vegetation, and the availability of resources along river corridors. For human communities, these rivers become something far more important than simple sources of drinking water. They become gathering places, travel routes, fishing grounds, seasonal meeting points, and eventually, many thousands of years later, the foundations of civilizations. But tonight, the river belongs primarily to nature. You walk down toward the bank. The soil becomes softer beneath your feet. Birds settle among reeds as daylight slowly fades. Fish occasionally break the surface with quiet splashes. The smell of damp earth rises from the shoreline. You pause and watch the current. Unlike the wandering herds, rivers provide a kind of permanence. Animals move, plants shift. Seasons change, but a reliable river returns again and again. Perhaps that is why humans are so often drawn toward water. Even today, many of the world's largest cities remain close to rivers, lakes, or coastlines. Old habits have a way of surviving. You kneel near the edge and touch the water. It is cool, refreshing. The current slips between your fingers and continues downstream toward destinations unknown, not far away. You notice signs of recent activity, footprints, fragments of worked stone, the remains of a small fire. People have been here recently, that's hardly surprising. Rivers attract life, and where life gathers, humans rarely stay far away. As darkness approaches, you imagine a small group arriving at this very spot. Perhaps they travelled for days following seasonal routes. Perhaps they came specifically because fish are abundant here during certain months. Perhaps they know this location as well as modern commuters know their daily route to work. The details vary. The pattern remains familiar. Humans seek reliable resources. This river offers many. One remarkable observation from archaeological research is that some early Holocene communities repeatedly return to the same river locations for generations. Certain campsites show evidence of long-term use stretching across centuries, not permanent settlement yet, but something interesting nonetheless. A growing attachment to place, the idea that some locations are worth returning to again and again. You sit quietly beneath a stand of trees overlooking the water. The fading sunlight filters through branches above. Leaves rustle softly in the evening breeze. The atmosphere feels wonderfully peaceful, somewhere across the river. A bird calls. Then another answers. Soon silence returns. The world seems to be settling down for the night, and as you sit there, it becomes easier to appreciate how important environmental stability can be. Imagine trying to plan your life in a world where conditions constantly change in unpredictable ways, where rivers disappear, where food sources shift dramatically, where weather patterns become unreliable. Long-term planning becomes difficult. The more stable the environment, the more opportunities exist for experimentation and innovation. That process is beginning now, slowly, almost invisibly. The people living beside rivers during this era do not yet know where the journey will lead. They simply respond to opportunities as they appear. Reliable water creates possibilities. Possibilities encourage new behaviors. New behaviors gradually reshape societies. You listen to the river flowing through the twilight. Its sound is steady, comforting, almost hypnotic. Different research teams continue to explore exactly how changing waterways influenced human settlement patterns during the early Holocene. Some evidence suggests rivers became increasingly important centers of activity as environmental conditions stabilized. Other findings emphasize regional differences and local adaptations. As often happens in history, there is no single explanation. Different communities follow different paths. Yet water appears again and again as a central character in the story. The sky deepens toward orange and purple. Shadows lengthen across the riverbank. A coolness enters the air. You pull a fur cloak more tightly around your shoulders. Nearby, insects continue their evening chorus. The scent of wet vegetation grows stronger as temperatures slowly fall. The river itself never seems to rest. Day and night, season after season, year after year, it continues its journey. A curious detail preserved in ancient evidence suggests that some prehistoric fishing practices were already surprisingly sophisticated. Communities developed specialized tools, seasonal knowledge, and techniques tailored to local waterways. People are often imagined as simple during this period. The reality is more impressive. A hunter-gatherer living beside a river may possess an extraordinary understanding of fish behavior, seasonal flooding, plant resources, and animal migrations. Knowledge is accumulated carefully, shared patiently, refined over generations in many ways. That knowledge is every bit as valuable as later technological inventions. The stars begin appearing overhead, one by one, small points of light emerging against the darkening sky. The river reflects a few of them on its surface, tiny flickers dancing with the current. You remain seated for a while longer. The day's warmth gradually fades, night settles gently across the landscape. The river continues flowing through the darkness just as it did yesterday and just as it will tomorrow. And perhaps that reliability is the most important gift this changing climate is beginning to provide. A world becoming slightly more predictable, a little more stable, a little more welcoming to long-term human plans. Ahead lie villages, fields, monuments, and cities. But all of those future achievements depend upon simple foundations: fresh water, reliable seasons, productive landscapes. Tonight, beside this ancient river, you can already sense those foundations quietly taking shape beneath the stars. Morning arrives quietly beside the river. The stars fade one by one. A pale, silver glow appears along the eastern horizon. Mist drifts above the water, moving slowly like breath across glass. The world feels hushed. You rise from your resting place beneath the trees and begin walking downstream. Dew clings to grasses along the riverbank. Small birds call from the reeds, somewhere beyond the mist. Fish disturb the surface with soft ripples. The river remains familiar, yet today your attention turns toward something farther away, toward the coast, toward shorelines that are slowly changing, toward lands that future generations will never see. At first glance, the world of 11,700 years ago appears permanent. The hills seem permanent, the forests seem permanent, the river itself appears timeless. But one of the great stories of this age is that coastlines across the world are moving, not because the land is marching anywhere, because the sea is rising. You continue along the waterway as it widens and slows. Many miles from here, glaciers continue melting in regions once buried beneath immense sheets of ice. Water that remained frozen for thousands of years now begins its long journey toward the oceans. Little by little, century by century, the seas respond. One of the best established findings from climate research is that global sea levels rose dramatically following the end of the last ice age. Over thousands of years, coastlines around the world retreated inland as meltwater entered the oceans. The process was gradual from a human perspective. No giant wave arrived to swallow continents overnight. Instead, each generation inherited a shoreline slightly different from the one known by their grandparents. You imagine standing beside a distant coast. The air smells of salt. Seabirds wheel overhead. Waves roll steadily toward shore, to the people living there. The changes might initially seem almost impossible to notice. A familiar beach becomes narrower. A marsh expands. A low-lying area floods more often than before. The sea inches forward, year after year, generation after generation. Eventually the transformation becomes undeniable. You leave the river and walk across open ground where the morning sun now warms your shoulders. The landscape is peaceful. Grass moves gently in the breeze. Wildflowers nod among patches of green. It is easy to forget how much the world is changing. Nature often works quietly. The largest transformations frequently arrive through countless small moments. A shoreline shifts slightly. A river alters its course. A forest expands. A glacier retreats. Individually, each change appears modest. Together, they reshape continents as you walk. Imagine the map of the world during this period. Many familiar coastlines look very different. Large areas that are now underwater remain dry land. Some regions connect territories that modern people know as separate islands. Others contain broad coastal plains stretching far beyond today's shores. One fascinating detail often overlooked is that entire prehistoric landscapes now lie beneath modern seas. Archaeologists have discovered evidence suggesting that people once hunted, travelled, and lived in regions that are currently submerged beneath coastal waters. Those ancient lands are lost to sight, but not entirely to history. Pieces of their story survive: stone tools, buried sediments, ancient animal remains. Each discovery offers a glimpse into vanished worlds. The morning grows brighter. You cross a gently rolling plain covered with grasses and scattered shrubs. Butterflies drift between flowers. The air carries the scent of warm vegetation. Somewhere nearby, animals move through the landscape. Their presence is felt more than seen. You find yourself thinking about memory. How would people remember a disappearing coastline? Would stories be passed from one generation to another? Would elders describe beaches that no longer existed? Would children listen with curiosity as grandparents pointed toward distant waters and said, "The land once stretched much farther than that"? It is entirely possible. Human beings are storytellers. We preserve important changes through memory, sometimes through myths, sometimes through traditions, sometimes through simple conversations around evening fires. Researchers continue to examine whether certain ancient flood stories preserved in oral traditions may contain distant echoes of real environmental changes experienced by prehistoric communities. The evidence is difficult to interpret, and opinions vary, but the possibility remains intriguing, and the idea itself feels almost poetic. A memory surviving thousands of years. A coastline remembered long after it vanished. You pause beneath a lone tree. Its branches provide welcome shade as the day gradually warms. Nearby, insects hum among wild plants. The steady rhythm of nature continues. Yet for communities living along coasts, rising seas create real challenges. Resources change. Settlements must sometimes move. Travel routes shift. Familiar landmarks disappear beneath water. Adaptation becomes necessary once again. Fortunately, adaptation has always been one of humanity's strengths. Throughout countless generations, people have adjusted to changing climates, changing landscapes, and changing opportunities. This moment is no different. You resume your walk. Ahead lies a shallow wetland filled with reeds and pools of water reflecting the sky. Waterfowl gather in surprising numbers. Their calls echo across the open space. The wetland itself may be relatively new. As sea levels rise and local water systems adjust, entirely new habitats emerge. Not all change brings loss. Some changes create opportunities. Wetlands can support fish, birds, plants, and other resources valuable to human communities. Nature is constantly rearranging itself, closing some doors, opening others. Different research teams have reached different conclusions regarding the pace of sea level rise in specific regions. Some coastlines appear to have changed steadily over long periods. Others experienced episodes of more rapid transformation. The details vary. The overall trend remains clear. The seas are advancing. The world map is being redrawn. You kneel beside one of the pools. The water reflects drifting clouds above. Tiny insects skate across the surface. Reeds sway gently in the breeze. The scene feels tranquil, almost timeless. Yet you know that everything around you exists because of ongoing change. That is one of history's quiet lessons. Stability often emerges from transformation. The warming climate that is reshaping coastlines is also helping create conditions that will eventually support agriculture, settlements, and civilization itself. The same forces producing challenges are also creating opportunities. History rarely moves in straight lines. Afternoon approaches. Sunlight sparkles across the wetlands. Birds rise suddenly into the sky before settling again farther away. You continue walking through this evolving landscape. Behind you lie ancient coastlines destined to disappear beneath the sea. Ahead lie generations of people who will adapt, innovate, and thrive within a changing world. For now, however, there is only the warm breeze, the rustling reeds, and the quiet awareness that the edges of continents are slowly retreating. The sea is patient, the land is patient, and humanity, whether it realizes it or not, is learning to be patient too, as the sun climbs higher and the wetlands shimmer beneath its light. You continue onward through a world whose very shape is being rewritten by water. The afternoon slowly softens as you leave the wetlands behind. Water still glimmers in the distance, reflecting sunlight like scattered pieces of polished stone. But your path now leads inland once more. The air feels comfortably warm, not hot, not cold, just balanced. And balance is exactly what this chapter of history is about. For tens of thousands of years before this moment, Earth's climate had often behaved like a restless traveller, shifting between colder and warmer conditions, advancing and retreating in ways that constantly challenged life. Now, something unusual is happening. The climate is settling down, not perfectly. Storms still come, droughts still occur, winters still arrive. But compared with the dramatic swings of the Ice Age world, the new Holocene climate offers a remarkable degree of stability. You walk across a gently rolling landscape where grasses, shrubs, and young trees share the terrain. Birds drift overhead on warm currents of air. Insects hum among flowering plants. Everything feels productive, comfortable, welcoming. It is easy to understand why life begins flourishing under these conditions. You pause on a hillside overlooking a broad valley. Below, streams weave through patches of woodland. Herds graze in open areas. The entire scene seems rich with possibility. Scientists studying ancient environmental records have found that the Holocene brought an unusually stable climate compared with much of the preceding Ice Age period. This stability helped create conditions that favoured long-term ecological growth across many regions. Of course, no one standing here would describe it in those terms. They simply experience a world that has become somewhat easier to understand. The seasons follow more predictable rhythms, plant growth becomes more reliable, certain resources appear with greater regularity. The environment begins rewarding observation and planning, and that changes everything. You start descending toward the valley floor. The scent of sun-warmed grass surrounds you. A breeze brushes gently across your face. The sounds of insects blend into a soft natural chorus. For human communities, predictability is valuable, perhaps more valuable than abundance alone. A resource that appears every year at roughly the same time can be anticipated. A river that flows consistently can be relied upon. A migration route that remains stable can be planned around. Gradually, people begin building knowledge not only about survival but about expectation. You can prepare for something when you know it is coming. That simple idea will eventually help reshape human civilization. As you walk, you notice clusters of berry-producing shrubs growing along a stream. The fruit is not yet ripe, but people familiar with this place would know exactly when to return. Knowledge accumulates, season after season, year after year, generation after generation. Today we might glance at a calendar app to remind us when something is scheduled. Here, the landscape itself serves as the calendar. The flowering of a plant, the arrival of a bird species, the appearance of fish in a river. Every event marks time. Every observation matters. You stop beside a grove of trees. Their leaves rustle softly overhead. Sunlight flickers through the branches. The cool shade feels pleasant after walking beneath the open sky. Nearby, you notice animal tracks crossing a patch of soft soil, fresh tracks. Perhaps only a few hours old, life is thriving here. And thriving ecosystems support growing human populations. Not enormous populations yet. Nothing resembling later cities or kingdoms, but in many areas. The number of people slowly increases as environmental conditions improve. More reliable food sources often mean more children survive into adulthood. Communities become larger. Connections between groups become more frequent. The story unfolds gradually, almost invisibly. One surprising discovery from archaeological research is that some early Holocene communities appear to have occupied certain favourable regions for extraordinarily long periods. The same valleys, river systems, and resource-rich zones attracted human activity again and again across centuries. People are beginning to develop deeper relationships with specific places. Not ownership in the modern sense, not permanent settlement yet, but familiarity, attachment, a sense of belonging. You continue walking through the grove. The forest opens into another meadow where wildflowers cover the ground in patches of yellow, white, and purple. Bees drift lazily between blossoms. The air smells sweet. Everything feels calm. The Holocene is often described as unusually stable, but researchers continue exploring exactly how stable it was in different regions. Some areas experienced significant local fluctuations, while others enjoyed long periods of environmental consistency. Nature rarely behaves uniformly across an entire planet. Even so, compared with the dramatic climate oscillations that preceded it. This era represents something special, a window of opportunity, a relatively calm chapter in Earth's environmental history, and humans happen to arrive at precisely the right moment to take advantage of it. You kneel beside a patch of flowering plants. Butterflies move among the blossoms. A small lizard darts across a nearby stone before disappearing into the grass. Such details might seem insignificant, yet they reveal the richness of the ecosystems developing around you. More stable climates support diverse plant communities. Diverse plant communities support diverse animal populations, and diverse ecosystems provide humans with a wider range of options. Options matter. They allow experimentation, they encourage innovation, they create resilience. If one food source becomes scarce, another may still be available, if conditions change slightly. Communities have alternatives. You rise and continue your journey. The afternoon light gradually takes on a golden quality. Long shadows begin stretching across the landscape. The day feels mature now, comfortably settled, much like the climate itself. A curious observation from paleoenvironmental studies is that pollen preserved in ancient lake sediments can reveal astonishing details about changing landscapes. Tiny grains trapped in mud thousands of years ago allow scientists to reconstruct forests, grasslands, and environmental conditions from long before written history existed. Nature leaves records everywhere. You simply need to know how to read them. Ancient people read tracks. Modern scientists read pollen. Both are searching for clues. Both are trying to understand the world. The breeze grows slightly cooler as evening approaches. Birdsong changes. Some species become quieter, while others grow more active. The landscape transitions gently from afternoon toward dusk. You reach another overlook and stop. The valley below glows beneath the lowering sun. Streams sparkle. Trees cast long shadows. Animals move through the grasslands. The entire scene feels harmonious. Not perfect. Not without challenges. But balanced. And balance creates possibilities. The climate shift that began 11,700 years ago is doing more than warming the world. It is creating conditions that encourage patience, planning, and deeper relationships with the land. People do not yet know it, but the foundations of future villages are already forming. The foundations of agriculture are already forming. The foundations of civilization are already forming, all hidden within countless ordinary days like this one. Days filled with sunlight, birdsong, flowing water, and a climate that has finally begun to settle into a rhythm humanity can learn to trust. As evening approaches and golden light washes across the valley, you continue onward through the heart of this new Holocene world, where stability itself is becoming one of history's most powerful forces. Evening settles gently across the valley. The sun hangs low now, casting long ribbons of golden light across grasslands and streams. Shadows stretch from every tree. The air has cooled enough that you can feel it on your skin, carrying scents of damp earth, crushed plants, and distant water. You continue walking through this increasingly familiar world, a world that has become more stable, a world that has become more predictable. And because of that predictability, something subtle is beginning to happen. People are starting to linger, not everywhere, not all at once, but in certain favoured places. Human groups are spending more time than they once did. The change is gradual enough that no one notices it as a revolution. It simply feels practical. If a location provides dependable water, abundant food, and seasonal resources, why leave sooner than necessary? You follow a stream that winds through the valley floor. The water moves quietly over smooth stones. Along the banks, stands of reeds sway in the evening breeze, birds settle into nearby trees. The landscape seems inviting, comfortable, easy to imagine returning to. That feeling is important. For most of human history before this point, mobility was one of the keys to survival. People followed resources wherever they appeared. Seasonal movement allowed communities to adapt to constantly changing conditions. Now the environment itself is changing in ways that make longer stays increasingly attractive. You notice signs of human activity ahead, a fire ring surrounded by stones, animal bones broken for marrow, fragments of worked flint. The remains are old, but not ancient. Someone used this place recently, and perhaps not for the first time. Archaeological evidence from several parts of the world suggests that some communities began occupying especially productive locations for longer periods during the early Holocene. The process unfolded differently from region to region, but repeated use of favoured sites became increasingly common. You stop beside the fire ring. The stones still sit where someone carefully placed them, perhaps months ago, perhaps years. The people who gathered here knew this place. They understood its rhythms. They likely knew when fish would appear in nearby waters, when certain plants would become available, when animals would pass through the valley. Knowledge of place was becoming increasingly valuable. The more predictable the environment, the greater the reward for understanding local conditions. You crouch beside the stream and watch the water flowing past. Imagine returning here year after year. You would learn every bend in the stream, every berry patch, every animal trail, every sheltered spot where a fire burns well during windy weather. The landscape itself becomes familiar, almost like an old friend. Today many people develop deep attachments to neighbourhoods, towns, or favourite places. The roots of that instinct may reach far back into prehistory. You rise and continue walking. The valley widens ahead. A cluster of trees grows near the water. Beyond them, open grasslands stretch toward distant hills. The setting sun paints everything in warm shades of gold and amber. It is beautiful. And beauty often accompanies productivity. Places rich in resources tend to attract life, not only animals, people too. A detail that often escapes attention is that some early Holocene campsites reveal evidence of repeated occupation over extraordinarily long periods. Groups returned again and again, sometimes over many generations, because certain locations consistently provided what they needed. The idea feels almost modern, finding a place that works, returning because it remains useful, building memories there, creating traditions there, not permanent settlement yet, but perhaps the first hints of something approaching it. You walk toward the grove of trees. Leaves rustle overhead as evening birds call from the branches. The air beneath the canopy feels cooler, more sheltered, a comfortable place to rest. You can easily imagine families gathering here after a day's activities, children playing near the stream, adults preparing food, stories shared beside evening fires. The scene feels familiar because, in many ways, it is. Human beings have always been social creatures. We gather, we share information, we create routines. What changes now is the environment supporting those routines. Reliable resources allow communities to spend more energy developing social connections rather than constantly relocating. The distinction may seem small, it is not. Some researchers believe that increasing environmental stability encourages stronger ties between people and particular landscapes. Others emphasize cultural innovation and social choices rather than climate alone. The reality may involve both. History often emerges from many causes working together. Rarely does a single factor explain everything. You leave the grove and step into an open meadow glowing beneath the final sunlight of the day. Insects drift through the air. Wildflowers catch the golden light. The atmosphere feels almost dreamlike. You find a smooth stone and sit for a moment. From here, you can observe the valley stretching in every direction. Streams, trees, grasslands, animal trails, all the ingredients needed to support life, not luxury, not abundance beyond imagination, simply reliability. And reliability is powerful. When people trust that resources will return, they can begin thinking differently about the future. Perhaps a fishing location can be revisited next season. Perhaps a favoured campsite can be maintained. Perhaps knowledge can be accumulated about a specific place rather than constantly adapting to entirely new surroundings. These ideas seem obvious to us. They were profound developments. The gradual strengthening of ties between people and places would eventually help pave the way for villages and permanent communities. That future remains distant, yet its first foundations are already visible. The sun now touches the horizon. The valley grows quieter. Birdsong begins to fade. Cool air settles into low areas near the stream. You notice faint animal sounds drifting from the grasslands. The day is ending. A hidden clue within the archaeological record suggests that some communities living during this period invested increasing effort in structures, storage, and features associated with particular locations. Such investments make the most sense when people expect to return. Why build something if you never plan to see it again? The question seems simple. Its implications are enormous. Returning matters, remembering matters, place matters. You stand and begin walking once more. The first stars appear overhead, tiny points of light emerging in the darkening sky. Behind you, the meadow fades into shadow. Ahead, the stream reflects the last traces of sunlight. The world feels peaceful, steady, predictable. The climate shift that began thousands of years ago is continuing to work quietly beneath the surface of everyday life. Not through grand announcements, not through dramatic transformations visible in a single generation, but through countless small decisions. Stay a little longer. Return next season. Build another fire here. Teach children about this valley. Remember this stream. Remember this grove. Remember this place. And so, beneath the first stars of evening, you continue your journey through a world where humanity is slowly learning that some places are worth coming back to, again and again, laying the earliest foundations of a more settled future. Night passes quietly across the valley. The stars wheel overhead in slow, silent patterns, somewhere beyond the darkness. Rivers continue flowing toward distant seas. Animals move through grasslands under moonlight. Wind brushes through leaves with a soft whisper. Then, little by little, dawn returns. A pale glow spreads along the horizon. Birdsong begins. Mist rises from the streams. You wake into another day in this increasingly stable Holocene world. The air feels cool and fresh as you walk through damp grass sparkling with morning dew. The landscape around you seems peaceful, familiar, predictable, and it is precisely that predictability that is beginning to encourage one of the most important experiments in human history, an experiment so gradual that no one realizes it is happening. The experiment involves seeds, tiny things, easy to overlook, small enough to rest in the palm of your hand, yet within those seeds lies the future. You follow a stream toward a broad area filled with wild grasses. The plants sway gently beneath the morning breeze. Some carry seed heads heavy with grain. Others have already released their seeds into the soil. The scene appears ordinary for countless generations. People have gathered wild plants from landscapes like this: roots, nuts, berries, fruits, seeds. Such resources have always been important parts of the human diet. Yet now something subtle is changing. People are spending more time in certain places, returning more frequently, observing more carefully, accumulating knowledge year after year. And with familiarity comes curiosity. You kneel beside a patch of grain bearing grasses. The seed heads feel rough against your fingertips. You imagine people harvesting these plants season after season. Over time, certain observations become difficult to ignore. Plants tend to grow where seeds fall. Disturbed soil often encourages new growth. Some locations produce larger harvests than others. Patterns emerge. The landscape begins teaching lessons. Archaeological evidence suggests that long before formal agriculture appeared, human communities were already developing sophisticated knowledge about wild plant resources. They understood seasonal cycles, harvesting methods, and local environmental conditions with remarkable precision. Knowledge arrives first, farming comes later. That distinction matters. Agriculture did not appear because someone suddenly invented it one afternoon. Instead, it emerged from thousands of years of observation. You continue walking through the grasslands. The morning sun climbs higher. Insects drift through shafts of golden light. Birds feed among the seed-bearing plants. Everywhere you look, life depends upon cycles of growth and renewal. You stop beside an area where the ground appears recently disturbed. Perhaps animals dug here. Perhaps flooding altered the soil. Perhaps people themselves influenced the landscape. Whatever the cause, new plants are growing vigorously. The connection between disturbance and growth is something ancient communities would gradually notice. Noticing leads to experimentation. Experimentation leads to innovation. And innovation often begins with simple questions. What happens if seeds are scattered intentionally? What happens if competing plants are removed? What happens if a useful species receives a little help? The questions seem obvious to us. At the time, they represented entirely new ways of thinking about relationships between people and plants. A fascinating clue from the archaeological record shows that some communities were managing useful plant resources long before full-scale agriculture emerged. Human influence on local vegetation often began gradually rather than appearing suddenly. The boundary between gathering and cultivation was not always clear. Imagine returning to the same valley every year. You know where the best plants grow. You know which patches produce the most food. You know when seeds ripen. Perhaps you begin protecting certain areas. Perhaps you encourage growth in subtle ways. Perhaps you simply pay closer attention than previous generations. Small actions accumulate. Small observations accumulate. History often changes through accumulation. Not dramatic moments. Quiet persistence. You sit beneath a tree overlooking the grasslands. The breeze carries the scent of vegetation warmed by sunlight. Nearby, insects buzz lazily among flowers. The world feels unhurried, and that is fitting. The transition toward agriculture unfolds over thousands of years. There are no countdown clocks, no announcements, no clear beginning or ending. Just people learning more about the landscapes that sustain them. Some researchers argue that environmental stability created favorable conditions for these developments. Others emphasize population growth, social interactions, or local ecological pressures. The evidence suggests that many factors work together. Climate alone did not invent agriculture, but it may have created opportunities that made experimentation more rewarding. Human curiosity did the rest. You rise and continue walking. Ahead, the stream widens into a shallow wetland rich with bird life. Waterfowl paddle among reeds. Fish occasionally disturb the surface. The area feels abundant. Food seems available in many forms. That abundance is important. Innovation often flourishes where people have enough security to experiment. A community struggling every day simply to survive has little time for long-term projects. A community with reliable resources can afford curiosity. And curiosity is one of humanity's most powerful traits. Today we conduct scientific experiments in laboratories filled with sophisticated equipment. 10,000 years ago, experiments often occurred in landscapes like this one. A seed planted, a plant protected, an observation remembered. The principle remains remarkably similar. You kneel beside the stream. The water flows steadily over small stones. Tiny fish flash beneath the surface. The scene feels timeless. Yet history is quietly unfolding. A detail many people overlook is that wild ancestors of important crops often looked very different from the plants we know today. Through countless generations of selection and cultivation, humans gradually transformed them into increasingly productive forms. The process required patience, lots of patience. Far more patience than most modern gardeners would tolerate. But ancient communities possess something that many of us lack: time. Generations of time. Knowledge passed from parents to children. Observations accumulated century after century. The morning gradually transitions toward midday. The air grows warmer. Birdsong becomes less intense. Shadows shorten beneath the sun. You continue through the landscape, noticing how closely everything depends upon observation. Animal migrations, seasonal flooding, plant growth, weather patterns, nothing escapes attention. People living in this world are expert students of nature. Their classrooms are rivers, forests, grasslands, and wetlands. Their textbooks are the seasons themselves, and increasingly, those lessons are encouraging a new relationship with the land, not merely taking resources, understanding them, influencing them, perhaps even shaping them. The implications are enormous, for now. However, the changes remain subtle. No villages filled with farmers around you. No fields stretch across the horizon. Only hints, possibilities, experiments, questions, and seeds. Tiny seeds resting beneath the soil, waiting. Just as civilization itself waits. Waiting for the centuries ahead when these early observations will grow into something far larger than anyone standing in this quiet valley could possibly imagine. As the sun climbs higher above the grasslands and the breeze stirs the ripening seed heads, you continue forward through a world where humanity is beginning to discover that nature can be observed, understood, and perhaps, very gently, guided. The day continues beneath a bright and gentle sky. You leave the grasslands behind and follow a narrow stream toward a region where the land feels increasingly familiar. The route itself seems worn by repeated use. Not a road, not even a trail in the modern sense. Just a path created by memory, by habit, by return. The stream curves through clusters of trees before opening into a broad clearing. Sunlight spills across the ground. Birds move between branches overhead. The scent of damp soil mixes with the fragrance of wild plants growing near the water. You stop at the edge of the clearing. Something feels different here, not dramatically different, just enough to notice. The place carries signs of repeated human presence. A few stones arranged near an old fire pit. Fragments of animal bone. Scattered tool-making debris. a patch of flattened ground where shelters may once have stood. The clues are subtle, yet together they tell a story. People have been here before, and they keep coming back. You walk slowly across the clearing. The ground feels firm beneath your feet. Nearby, the stream provides reliable water. Fish swim in its deeper pools. Edible plants grow along its banks. Forests offer fuel and materials. Grasslands nearby attract animals. It is the sort of location that people would remember, the sort of location worth revisiting. As environmental stability continues across many regions, certain places begin drawing repeated occupation. Not because anyone has invented villages yet, not because formal cities exist, simply because some locations make life easier. You kneel beside the remains of an ancient fire. The ashes are long gone, the warmth vanished centuries ago, yet the arrangement of stones remains. Silent evidence that people gathered here, cooked food here, shared stories here, perhaps laughed here, perhaps mourned here. Human life leaves traces, even small traces, and sometimes those traces reveal surprisingly large changes. You sit quietly beside the stream. The water produces a soothing rhythm as it moves over stones. Dragonflies hover above the surface. The afternoon sun sparkles across the current. It is easy to imagine spending days here, weeks perhaps, maybe longer. That possibility is becoming increasingly important. For much of prehistory, many communities moved frequently in response to changing resources. Yet some environments now offer enough reliability to encourage longer stays. Not complete permanence, not yet, but something closer than before. The difference may seem small. History often grows from small differences. You watch a fish break the surface. Ripples spread outward before disappearing. In many parts of the world, the transition toward more settled living unfolded gradually. Communities did not wake one morning and decide to invent villages. Instead, they slowly increased the amount of time spent in favorable locations. A season became several seasons. Several seasons became years of repeated return. Eventually, some places developed deep significance, practical significance, social significance, even emotional significance. You continue walking through the clearing. A breeze stirs the leaves overhead. The air feels pleasantly warm. Somewhere in the distance, birds call from the forest edge. You imagine children growing up in a place like this, learning where berries grow, learning which pools contain fish, learning which trees provide useful wood. Knowledge becomes increasingly tied to specific landscapes. That connection changes the way people think. When you expect to leave tomorrow, long-term improvements matter less. When you expect to return next year, the calculation changes. Perhaps a shelter is reinforced. Perhaps supplies are stored. Perhaps the area around camp is organized more carefully. Small investments begin making sense. Hidden within ancient campsites are clues suggesting that some communities gradually expanded the effort they devoted to particular locations. The pattern appears in different forms across several regions of the world. The process is not identical everywhere. Human history rarely follows a single script. Yet the trend is noticeable. People and places are becoming more closely connected. You arrive at the center of the clearing. The ground here is relatively level, ideal for temporary shelters. Nearby stands a grove of trees, offering shade during summer and protection from wind during colder months. Everything about the location feels practical, comfortable, well chosen. You might even say it feels like the beginning of a neighborhood, although no one would recognize that word for thousands of years. The afternoon passes slowly. Clouds drift overhead. The stream continues its quiet journey. The clearing remains peaceful. And yet, beneath that peaceful surface, larger changes are taking shape. As communities spend more time in favorable locations, social relationships become increasingly complex. People meet more frequently. Information spreads more easily. Traditions become linked to particular places. Shared experiences accumulate. Memory becomes anchored to geography. A valley is no longer just a valley. It becomes the place where people gather, the place where stories are told, the place where children learn, the place where ancestors once stayed. That transformation may be difficult to measure, but its importance should not be underestimated. Human beings create meaning wherever they spend time, and meaning has a remarkable ability to encourage permanence. The exact pace of this process remains difficult to determine. Some regions appear to have moved toward more settled lifestyles relatively early. Others maintained highly mobile traditions for much longer periods. There was no universal timetable. Different communities responded to different environments, different opportunities, different challenges. Yet the overall direction becomes increasingly visible. You stop beneath a large tree and rest in its shade. The bark feels rough beneath your hand. Sunlight filters through the leaves above, creating shifting patterns on the ground. The atmosphere is wonderfully calm. A forgotten detail from this era is that some settlements appearing later in prehistory occupied locations that had already attracted human visitors for generations. Long before permanent structures appeared, people had often recognized the value of these landscapes. The best places tend to remain attractive. Today, major cities often occupy locations with favorable geography, rivers, harbors, fertile land. Ancient communities noticed the same advantages. The scale was different. The logic was remarkably similar. You rise and continue toward the edge of the clearing. The afternoon is beginning to soften toward evening once again. Long shadows stretch across the grass. Birdsong gradually changes. The landscape seems content, balanced, stable. The climate shift that began thousands of years earlier continues shaping human decisions in quiet ways. Reliable resources encourage return. Return encourages familiarity. Familiarity encourages investment. Investment encourages attachment. And attachment slowly lays the groundwork for something entirely new. Not a city, not yet, not even a true village, but the possibility of one. As golden light spreads across the clearing and the stream glimmers beneath the lowering sun, you continue walking through a world where humanity is beginning to discover that some places are more than temporary stops. Some places are becoming home. Evening deepens around the clearing that has begun to feel strangely familiar. The stream still murmurs softly nearby. Trees sway gently beneath a cooling breeze. Above, the first stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. You pause for a moment beside the water. So far, the story has seemed straightforward. The climate warmed, forests spread, rivers stabilized. People spent longer periods in favorable locations. Eventually, agriculture and villages would emerge. Simple enough, or perhaps not. History has a habit of becoming more complicated the closer you look. And tonight, as darkness settles across the valley, you find yourself standing in the middle of one of the most fascinating questions in human history. How much of civilization's story can be traced back to climate, and how much came from human ingenuity itself? The answer is not entirely clear. You begin walking along the stream beneath the fading light. The water reflects the first stars overhead. Night insects have started their evening chorus. The world feels calm. Yet beneath that calm lies a debate that continues among researchers today. Climate clearly mattered. The warming at the beginning of the Holocene transformed ecosystems across much of the world. Stable environmental conditions created opportunities that had not existed during many earlier periods. But opportunity alone does not create civilization. Human choices matter too. You follow the stream toward a patch of open ground where the moonlight falls across the grass. The silver glow makes everything appear softer, almost dreamlike. Imagine two communities living in similar environments. One develops new ways of managing plants. Another continues relying primarily on hunting and gathering. Why the climate may be similar, The opportunities may be similar, yet different outcomes emerge. Human beings are not simply passengers carried along by environmental change. They are active participants, creative, curious, adaptable, sometimes unpredictable. The relationship between climate and culture is far more like a conversation than a command. You sit on a smooth stone near the water's edge. The night air feels cool against your skin. A faint scent of damp vegetation drifts from the stream as you listen to the water flowing past. It becomes easier to appreciate the complexity of the question. Environmental stability can encourage innovation, but people still need to innovate. Resources can become abundant, but communities must still decide how to use them. The land may provide possibilities. Human imagination determines which possibilities become reality. Modern archaeological research reveals remarkable diversity among early Holocene societies. Communities living under broadly similar environmental conditions often developed very different lifestyles, traditions, and economic practices. That diversity matters. It reminds us that there was never a single path towards civilization. There were many paths. Some communities embraced agriculture relatively early. Others continued hunting and gathering for thousands of years. Some became increasingly settled. Others remained highly mobile. Human history is filled with alternatives. You continue walking beneath the stars. The moon has risen higher now, casting pale light across the valley. The stream glimmers like polished metal. In the distance, you hear the call of a night bird. The atmosphere feels wonderfully peaceful. The more you think about it, the more impressive ancient people become. It is tempting to imagine civilization as inevitable, as though warming temperatures automatically produce villages, farms, and cities. Yet nothing about the future was guaranteed. Every development required experimentation, learning, risk, patience. Someone had to notice patterns. Someone had to try new approaches. Someone had to pass knowledge to the next generation. The climate may have created favourable conditions. People still did the work. You stop beside a cluster of trees where moonlight filters through the branches. Leaves shimmer softly in the night breeze. The scene feels timeless. And perhaps that is part of the challenge. When looking backward across thousands of years, it is easy to compress events together, to see only the outcome. Agriculture appears, villages appear, cities appear, but living through the process would have felt very different. Slow, uncertain, gradual. A single generation might notice only small changes, a few new habits, a few new ideas, nothing that seemed destined to reshape the world. The clues point in multiple directions when researchers examine the origins of agriculture and settlement, climate, population growth, social relationships, technological innovation, and local environmental conditions all appear to have played important roles. There may never be a single explanation that satisfies everyone. History is often more tangled than that. You smile slightly at the thought. Even in the deep past, humanity resists simple explanations. Some things never change. You continue along the stream. The night grows deeper. Stars now fill the sky from horizon to horizon, without modern lights. Their brilliance is astonishing. Thousands upon thousands of points of light scattered across the darkness. Ancient people knew these skies intimately. The stars helped mark seasons, guide travel, measure time. Nature served as both calendar and compass. You look upward for a moment, then back toward the valley below. The same climate that encourages stability also encourages observation. The same stability that supports experimentation also allows traditions to accumulate, generation after generation. Knowledge grows not because anyone planned civilization, simply because people keep learning. A surprising pattern emerges when ancient settlements are compared across different regions. Similar developments often occurred independently. separated by vast distances and thousands of miles. Different communities found their own solutions to similar challenges. That fact is easy to overlook. Human creativity was widespread. Innovation was not limited to one valley, one river, or one culture. Many groups were exploring new possibilities at the same time. The night breeze strengthens slightly. Grass ripples in gentle waves. The stream continues its steady song. You find yourself reflecting on how often history is described through grand events, battles, kings, empires. Yet the story unfolding around you contains none of those things. No armies march across these fields. No monuments rise above the horizon, only ordinary people living ordinary lives. And somehow those ordinary lives will change the world. A child learning which plants grow best near water. A family returning to the same campsite year after year. A community sharing knowledge across generations. Small actions, small observations, small decisions. History is built from countless moments like these. The moon now stands high overhead. Silver light covers the valley. Trees cast dark shadows across the grasslands. The world feels quiet, steady, thoughtful. Just as the climate shift created opportunities, human beings created responses. Neither story makes complete sense without the other. The environment shaped possibilities. People shaped outcomes. Together, they produced a future no one could yet imagine. You continue walking beside the stream, listening to the water and the distant sounds of the night. Around you stretches a world balanced between nature and human creativity. A world where warming temperatures open doors. A world where curiosity stepped through them, and under the stars of the young Holocene. That partnership between climate and imagination is only beginning its long journey towards civilization. Dawn arrives softly after the long night. A pale band of light appears along the eastern horizon. Stars gradually fade. Mist gathers above the stream like drifting silk. The valley awakens slowly, without hurry. You continue your journey through the young Holocene world. Birdsong returns. The air smells fresh and cool. Tiny droplets of dew cling to grasses and leaves. Everything feels renewed. As the sun rises, your attention turns toward another quiet transformation, taking place across these changing landscapes. Not a transformation involving climate alone, not one involving rivers or forests. This story involves animals, more specifically. It involves relationships. Relationships that will eventually reshape human history. You follow a game trail leading away from the stream and into open grasslands. The path winds between patches of wildflowers and low shrubs. Ahead, several animals graze peacefully beneath the morning light. For countless generations, humans have hunted animals. That relationship is ancient. Predator and prey, tracker and tracked. The pattern stretches deep into prehistory, yet in some places, new forms of interaction are beginning to emerge, gradually, almost invisibly. You pause and watch the animals feeding. They seem calm, alert, but calm. A breeze carries the scent of grasses warmed by the first sunlight. The scene feels peaceful. At this point in history, most animals remain entirely wild. Human communities still depend heavily on hunting, fishing, and gathering. Yet the conditions created by the Holocene are encouraging longer stays in certain places, stronger connections to particular landscapes, and increasing familiarity with local animal populations. Familiarity changes behavior on both sides. The more time people spend around certain species, the more opportunities arise for observation, and observation often leads to unexpected developments. You continue walking through the grasslands. Small birds rise from the vegetation as you pass. In the distance, animals move slowly across the plain. The relationship between humans and animals is becoming increasingly complex. People know migration routes, breeding seasons, feeding habits, preferred habitats. They understand details accumulated through generations of careful attention. That knowledge can become remarkably sophisticated. Long before written records existed, communities possessed deep expertise regarding the creatures sharing their world. You reach a shallow hillside overlooking a broad valley. From here you can see animals moving near a water source below. The morning light spreads across the landscape like liquid gold. Everything appears calm, balanced. It is within environments like these that one of humanity's oldest partnerships may have deepened. The partnership with dogs. Evidence from earlier periods already shows that humans and dogs had established relationships long before the beginning of the Holocene. By this era, dogs accompanied many communities as companions, hunting partners, and guardians. It is difficult to overstate how remarkable that development was. A wild predator had gradually become an ally, not through conquest, not through force alone, but through generations of cooperation. You imagine a camp at dusk, a fire crackling softly, people sharing food, a dog resting nearby. The image feels familiar because that partnership continues today, across thousands of years, countless cultures, and enormous technological changes. The relationship endured. Some connections prove surprisingly durable. You begin descending toward the valley floor. The air warms as the morning progresses. Insects hum among flowering plants. The scent of vegetation grows stronger. As communities become increasingly tied to specific places, interactions with local animal populations also become more frequent. Patterns become easier to recognize. Behaviors become easier to predict. Opportunities for management begin to appear. Not full domestication yet, just possibilities, tiny openings. You stop beside a small pond where animal tracks crowd the muddy shoreline. The variety is impressive. Large tracks, small tracks, fresh impressions. Older ones partly softened by moisture. The pond functions as a meeting place for many species, humans included. You kneel and study the ground. Every track tells a story. An animal passed here yesterday. Another arrived before dawn. Several visited during the night. Ancient people were masters at reading such clues. What appears to us as random marks in mud often represented valuable information. Direction, speed, age, condition, all could be interpreted by experienced observers. The exact path toward animal domestication remains difficult to reconstruct. Different regions followed different timelines, and not all domesticated species emerged under the same circumstances. There was no universal formula. The story unfolded in many ways. Yet observation almost certainly played a central role. You cannot manage what you do not understand. And prehistoric communities understood animals extraordinarily well. The sun climbs higher. The pond reflects patches of blue sky between drifting clouds. Dragonflies skim the surface. Everything feels wonderfully alive. An unexpected detail emerges from studies of domesticated animals. Species that eventually formed close relationships with humans often possessed behavioral traits that made cooperation possible. Not every animal is equally suited to domestication. Zebras, for example, never became common domestic animals despite sharing certain similarities with horses. Nature provides opportunities, but only some opportunities prove workable. You rise and continue along the shoreline. Nearby, a group of grazing animals lifts its head briefly before returning to feed. The interaction lasts only a moment, yet it captures something important. Human beings are part of the ecosystem, not separate from it, not above it, at least not yet. People and animals share the same landscapes, the same water sources, the same seasons. Their stories remain closely intertwined. The morning gradually transitions toward midday. Warm sunlight spreads across the valley. Birds circle high overhead. The breeze carries scents from grasslands and distant forests. As you walk, it becomes easier to imagine how familiarity changes relationships. A hunter learns the habits of prey. A community learns the behavior of local species. Generation after generation, knowledge deepens. Sometimes that knowledge remains focused on hunting. Sometimes it leads elsewhere, toward protection, toward management, toward partnership. The boundaries are not always clear. History rarely provides neat dividing lines. One year may look much like the year before. One generation may resemble the previous generation. Then, centuries later, the cumulative effect becomes visible. A new relationship has formed. A new possibility has emerged. You reach another rise overlooking the valley. Below, animals continue moving through the landscape as they have for countless years. Streams sparkle in the sunlight. Grasslands ripple beneath the breeze. The world appears unchanged, yet subtle transformations continue beneath the surface. The warming climate supports stable ecosystems. Stable ecosystems support repeated observation. Observation supports knowledge. Knowledge creates opportunities, and opportunities, given enough time, can alter the course of history. You stand quietly beneath the midday sun. Around you stretches a living world filled with movement and connection. Animals grazing, birds soaring, insects humming, humans learning. The future still lies far beyond the horizon. Fields have not yet replaced grasslands. Cities have not yet replaced valleys. Civilization has not yet arrived. But relationships are evolving, patiently, naturally, one observation at a time, and somewhere within those growing relationships between people and animals lies another foundation upon which the future world will eventually be built. The afternoon sun hangs comfortably above the horizon as you continue across the valley. The air is warm but not oppressive. A gentle breeze moves through the grasses. Birds circle lazily overhead. Streams glimmer in the distance as they wind through woodlands and meadows. The landscape feels settled, mature, confident in itself. Thousands of years have passed since the Great Warming began, and the world now carries a different character than the Ice Age environments that came before it. The rivers flow along familiar paths. The forests have expanded. Human communities have grown increasingly connected to particular places, and in some regions, something extraordinary is beginning to appear. Not farms, not cities. Something more mysterious, monuments. You walk toward a broad rise overlooking the countryside. The slope is gentle. Wildflowers bloom among patches of grass. Insects hum softly in the afternoon light. At the top of the rise, you stop and look across the landscape. Imagine people gathering here. Not merely to hunt, not merely to gather food, but to meet, to share ceremonies, to participate in activities larger than any one family or small group. The idea itself is remarkable. For a long time, people imagined that large monuments could only appear after agriculture became widespread. The old assumption seemed logical. Build farms first, then villages, then organize religion, then monuments. History, however, rarely follows the neat order we expect. In several parts of the ancient world, large communal structures appear surprisingly early, long before the first cities, long before writing, long before kings. You begin walking across the hilltop. The grass brushes gently against your legs. The afternoon sunlight creates long patterns across the ground. The scene feels peaceful. Yet beneath that peace lies evidence of growing social complexity. Communities are becoming capable of organizing larger projects. Cooperation is expanding. Ideas are spreading across wider networks. People who may live many miles apart can still gather for shared purposes. That ability will eventually become one of civilization's defining strengths. You pause beside a cluster of weathered stones protruding from the earth. They are ordinary stones, yet they encourage your imagination. What would it take to move something heavy without machines? What would it take to coordinate dozens or hundreds of people? What conversations would occur? Who would organize the effort? Why would anyone agree to participate? The questions themselves reveal something important. Large projects require trust, shared goals, communication. Communities do not suddenly become capable of such things. Those abilities develop gradually, over generations. The warm climate of the Holocene did not simply create richer ecosystems, it also created opportunities for people to gather more regularly. And when people gather regularly, ideas travel, traditions grow, cooperation becomes easier. You descend the far side of the hill toward a broad valley floor. A stream winds through reeds and flowering plants. Dragonflies hover above the water. The entire landscape seems alive with movement as you walk. It becomes easier to imagine groups arriving from different directions, families meeting after months apart, knowledge being exchanged, stories shared, partnerships formed, perhaps celebrations held. Human beings are social creatures. We have always enjoyed gathering together. The scale simply changes. Over time, repeated gatherings can create something larger than the sum of their parts. A shared identity, a shared tradition, a shared purpose. What often surprises modern people is that some of the earliest monumental construction projects appeared before agriculture became dominant in certain regions. The sequence was more complicated than many historians once assumed. That realization changed the way researchers think about early societies. People did not necessarily wait for civilization before becoming ambitious. In some cases, ambition came first. You kneel beside the stream. The water is cool. Small fish dart among submerged plants. Birds call from nearby reeds. The atmosphere remains wonderfully calm. Yet the story unfolding beneath the surface is anything but small. Imagine organizing a gathering involving hundreds of individuals. Food must be acquired. Knowledge must be shared. Social relationships must be maintained. The process itself encourages cooperation, and cooperation has consequences. The more people work together, the more capable they become of attempting larger projects. You rise and continue walking. The afternoon slowly advances. Clouds drift across the sky. Shadows move across the grasslands. The world seems content to move at its own pace. As you travel, you begin noticing how interconnected everything has become. Stable climate, reliable resources, repeated gatherings, growing networks. None of these developments alone create civilization. Together, however, they form a powerful combination. History often advances through combinations, rarely through a single cause. A river supports life. A favorable valley attracts visitors. Visitors exchange ideas. Ideas inspire cooperation. Cooperation enables new possibilities. Each step appears modest. The cumulative effect becomes enormous. You reach a grove of trees providing welcome shade. The leaves rustle softly overhead. Sunlight filters through the branches in shifting patterns. You sit for a while beneath the canopy. The cool air feels refreshing. The sounds of birds and insects blend into a soothing rhythm. In moments like this, it becomes easier to appreciate how slowly history unfolds. No one living during this era knows where these developments will lead. No one can foresee cities filled with thousands of people. No one can imagine writing systems, governments, or empires. They simply live their lives. They gather. They share knowledge. They build relationships. And those ordinary activities gradually create extraordinary outcomes. The details remain uncertain in many cases. Some monumental sites may have served ceremonial purposes. Others may have functioned as gathering places for communities spread across large regions. Different locations likely fulfilled different roles. Not every mystery has been solved. And perhaps that uncertainty adds to the fascination. Ancient stones do not always explain themselves. You leave the shade and continue through the afternoon light. The valley stretches endlessly before you. Grasslands ripple beneath the breeze. Streams sparkle in the distance. The world feels stable, connected, full of possibility. A small clue preserved in ancient construction projects hints at just how sophisticated some early communities already were. Moving heavy materials, coordinating labour, and maintaining shared traditions required levels of organisation once thought impossible for hunter-gatherer societies. Human potential has always been greater than we sometimes assume, even before cities, even before farming became widespread, even before written history began. The sun begins its slow descent toward evening. Golden light spreads across the landscape. Birds glide above the valley. The air cools slightly. You continue walking through this world of growing connections and shared ambitions. A world where communities are learning that cooperation can accomplish remarkable things. A world where monuments are beginning to rise not because civilization already exists, but because the foundations of civilization are quietly being assembled, stone by stone, meeting by meeting, generation by generation. And beneath the warm skies of the Holocene, those foundations continue to grow stronger with every passing year. The golden afternoon slowly drifts toward evening. You leave the hilltop behind and follow a broad valley where streams weave through grasslands and patches of woodland. The air is calm, birds move between trees, insects hum softly above flowering plants. Everything around you feels abundant, not endlessly abundant, not effortlessly abundant, but richer than many of the harsher environments that came before. And with abundance comes a curious challenge. Success creates new questions. The earlier steps toward farming, animal management, and more settled communities have begun opening possibilities that previous generations rarely encountered. At first glance, these possibilities seem entirely positive. More reliable food, more predictable resources, stronger connections to specific places, longer periods of stability. Yet every advantage introduces new complications. History has a habit of working that way. You walk beside a stream lined with reeds and low shrubs. The water moves slowly here. Small fish gather in shaded pools. A kingfisher dives suddenly, then vanishes downstream. The landscape appears peaceful. Yet beneath that peaceful appearance, human societies are beginning to change. Imagine a community that can gather more food than it immediately needs. Such moments may be rare at first. A particularly successful harvest of wild grain, an unusually productive fishing season, a period of favourable weather. For the first time, people begin facing a problem that sounds almost luxurious. What should be done with the extra food? The question matters. Food that cannot be stored often goes to waste. Food that can be stored changes possibilities. You stop beside a cluster of trees where the ground remains cool and shaded. The scent of leaves and damp soil fills the air. Nearby, birds chatter among the branches. You imagine people experimenting with storage, protecting food from moisture, protecting it from animals, protecting it from decay. Simple tasks, perhaps, yet their consequences are enormous. Stored food represents something new, a bridge between seasons, a way of carrying abundance into the future. That ability gradually transforms how people think about time. When survival depends entirely upon today's resources, attention focuses on the present, when resources can be preserved. Planning becomes more important. Tomorrow begins to matter differently. Next year begins to matter differently. The future becomes something that can be prepared for. You continue along the valley floor, the afternoon light grows softer. Long shadows stretch across the grass. A gentle breeze moves through the reeds beside the stream. Across several regions of the ancient world, communities gradually developed increasingly sophisticated ways to preserve food. Drying, storing, processing, and protecting resources became valuable skills as societies experimented with new ways of living. Knowledge itself becomes a resource. Methods are remembered, techniques are shared, mistakes become lessons, successes become traditions. Generation after generation, information accumulates, and information has a remarkable tendency to change societies. You reach a broad meadow filled with tall grasses. The seed heads sway beneath the breeze like waves upon a green sea. It is easy to imagine people gathering these plants, easy to imagine baskets filled with grain, easy to imagine experiments unfolding slowly across decades and centuries. Yet growing food and storing food are not exactly the same thing. One challenge often leads to another. A community that stores resources must protect them. A community that remains in one location longer may require additional organization. The more successful a settlement becomes, the more responsibilities it acquires. Comfort creates complexity. You smile slightly at the thought. Modern life still follows that rule. A simple cabin is easier to maintain than a city. A small garden is easier to manage than thousands of acres of farmland. Growth solves problems. Growth also creates them. You continue walking through the meadow. The grasses brush gently against your legs. The sun hangs lower now. Everything glows with warm afternoon light. One aspect of early settlement that often surprises people is how quickly practical concerns begin multiplying. Food storage, resource sharing, seasonal planning, and cooperation all become increasingly important as communities spend more time in particular locations. No one wakes up and invents complexity. Complexity grows, slowly, naturally, like roots spreading beneath the soil. You pause near a small rise overlooking the valley. From here you can see streams, woodlands, grasslands, and distant hills. The view feels peaceful, balanced. Yet beneath that balance lies constant adjustment. Communities must decide how resources are distributed, who performs particular tasks, how knowledge is passed to younger generations. Such questions existed long before agriculture. Now they become even more significant. The more settled a community becomes, the more often people interact, the more important social organization becomes. Human beings are wonderfully cooperative creatures. They can also be wonderfully complicated creatures. Both qualities have shaped history. You sit beneath a tree and listen to the wind moving through its leaves. The sound is soothing. The air has cooled slightly, evening approaches. Across the valley, animals move toward water sources before nightfall. The rhythm of nature continues unchanged. Yet human relationships are gradually evolving. Different communities likely handled these challenges in different ways. Some may have emphasized cooperation through shared traditions. Others may have relied on family networks, local customs, or systems that left no clear trace in the archaeological record. The details often remain hidden, but the process itself becomes visible. Growth encourages organization. Organization encourages innovation. Innovation encourages further growth. The cycle begins turning. You rise and continue your walk ahead. The stream widens into a shallow pool reflecting the sky. The surface glows orange beneath the lowering sun. Birds skim across the water before disappearing into the reeds. The atmosphere feels wonderfully calm. A small clue from ancient settlements reveals how rapidly practical knowledge could accumulate once people remained in favorable locations for longer periods. Storage pits, specialized tools, and evidence of food processing appear in places where communities increasingly invested effort in the future. Investment. That word matters. Investment means sacrificing a little today to gain something tomorrow. It is one of the most powerful ideas in human history. Build a shelter, store food, plant seeds, raise animals, teach children. All are forms of investment. All depend upon believing that the future is worth preparing for, and preparation becomes easier when the environment itself is relatively stable. The Holocene climate does not guarantee success. It simply makes long-term thinking more practical. You stand beside the pool and watch the evening sky reflected in the water. Clouds drift overhead. Their mirrored shapes ripple gently across the surface. The world feels quiet, reflective, as though pausing to consider what comes next. The answer, of course, is that growth continues, communities become larger, knowledge becomes deeper, connections become stronger, opportunities become greater, challenges become greater too. The path toward civilization is not a straight line climbing endlessly upward. It twists, turns, adapts. Yet each new challenge also reveals new possibilities. The sun now approaches the horizon. Golden light floods the valley, streams shimmer, grasslands glow, trees cast long shadows across the earth. You continue forward through a world where abundance is beginning to create entirely new questions. Questions about planning, questions about cooperation, questions about the future itself. And beneath the warm evening sky of the Holocene, humanity is slowly learning how to answer them. The evening deepens as you continue through the valley. The sun has lowered toward the western horizon, bathing the land in soft amber light. Streams glow like ribbons of copper. Long shadows stretch across the grasslands. The breezes become cooler now, carrying the scent of water, wood, and distant vegetation. You walk at an easy pace. The landscape around you feels familiar, not because you have visited this exact place before, but because the patterns are becoming recognizable. A reliable stream, a sheltered grove, open ground suitable for gathering, nearby resources, the ingredients that attract people again and again, and as communities return to favored places generation after generation, something else begins to emerge. Connections, not just between people and landscapes, between people and other people. You follow the stream downstream until you reach a broad crossing where the water becomes shallow enough to wade through. Animal tracks mark the muddy banks. Footprints do as well. Not recent footprints, ancient ones, the kind left behind by countless journeys. You imagine travelers arriving from distant valleys, families carrying tools, hunters returning from seasonal expeditions, groups bringing stories from places beyond the horizon. The world may seem vast, but humans have always found ways to connect it. Long before written maps existed, pathways crossed grasslands, forests, mountains, and rivers. People moved along those routes carrying far more than food and supplies. They carried knowledge, ideas, traditions, memories. You step into the shallow water. The current flows gently around your ankles. The sensation is cool and refreshing after the warmth of the afternoon. On the far bank, you notice a small stone unlike the rock surrounding it. Its colour is different. Its texture unusual. It appears to have come from somewhere else, perhaps very far away. Objects like this tell quiet stories. A stone carried from one region to another. A shell found hundreds of miles inland. A tool crafted from material unavailable nearby. Such discoveries appear across ancient landscapes. The items themselves are small, their implications are enormous. People were moving, meeting, exchanging, learning. The world of the early Holocene was not a collection of isolated communities living entirely separate lives. Connections stretched farther than we sometimes imagine. You continue along the riverbank. The evening sky has begun turning shades of orange and pink. Birds cross overhead on their way to resting places. The atmosphere feels peaceful as settlements become more established. Relationships between communities become increasingly valuable. One group may know where certain resources can be found. Another may possess specialized skills. A third may have access to materials unavailable elsewhere. Sharing benefits everyone, at least most of the time. Human cooperation has always been one of our greatest strengths. You arrive at a small rise overlooking the valley. From here, several streams can be seen converging below. Natural meeting places like this often attract activity. People traveling from different directions eventually cross paths, and when people meet, Ideas travel. Perhaps that is the most important resource of all. Ideas require no baskets, no storage pits, no pack animals. A useful technique can spread from one community to another with remarkable efficiency. A better tool design, a more effective hunting strategy, a new way to process food, a different approach to building shelters. Knowledge moves through conversation, through observation, through imitation. One person learns, then another, then another. The process feels ordinary while it is happening. Its long-term consequences can be extraordinary. You sit on a flat stone overlooking the streams below. The evening light softens further. The valley glows beneath the approaching dusk. It becomes easier to imagine small gatherings taking place near the water, people exchanging news, discussing seasonal conditions, sharing information about animal movements or resource availability. No one records these conversations, no written accounts survive, yet the effects remain visible, knowledge accumulated, techniques improved, communities adapted. The traces of those exchanges appear long after the voices themselves have faded. Sometimes a tool style appears in a new region. Sometimes materials travel surprisingly long distances. Sometimes similarities emerge between places separated by many days of travel. The people left behind clues rather than explanations. You stand and continue walking. The path leads through open grassland shimmering beneath the last warmth of the day. Grass brushes softly against your legs. The air smells fresh. A distant animal call echoes across the valley. You think about how easily modern people take communication for granted. Today a message can cross an ocean in moments. Here, information moves at the speed of walking, yet even walking can carry ideas remarkably far. Given enough years, given enough travellers, given enough curiosity, a child learning a new technique from a visitor may eventually teach it to the next generation. The original source is forgotten. The knowledge survives. History often works that way. The names disappear. The ideas remain. You reach a grove of trees where evening birds settle among the branches. Leaves rustle softly overhead. The fading sunlight filters through the canopy in golden patterns. Everything feels calm. The valley below has grown quieter, yet beneath the quiet lies an increasingly connected world. Not connected by roads or writing, connected by people. People who travel, people who share, people who observe, people who remember. The future growth of villages and larger communities depends upon these networks more than it might first appear. Food matters, climate matters, water matters, but information matters too. Knowledge allows opportunities to spread beyond a single location. One successful innovation does not remain isolated forever. Eventually someone notices. Eventually someone copies it. Eventually it becomes part of a larger story. You leave the grove and emerge onto open ground once more. The first stars are beginning to appear. The western horizon still glows faintly with the final light of sunset. The streams below reflect both sky and starlight. The entire valley seems suspended between day and night, between past and future. The climate shift that began thousands of years earlier created conditions that encouraged stability. Stability encouraged settlement. Settlement encouraged interaction. Interaction encouraged exchange. An exchange quietly expanded the horizons of countless communities. No one standing beside these streams can imagine the trade networks of future civilizations. No one can picture ships crossing oceans or caravans crossing deserts. Yet the earliest foundations are already here. A traveller carrying a story, a visitor carrying a tool, a family carrying knowledge from one valley to another. Simple acts, repeated endlessly. As darkness settles gently across the landscape, you continue onward through a world where human connections are becoming stronger, wider, and more influential with every passing generation. Night settles fully across the valley. The last traces of sunset have disappeared beyond the horizon. Above you, the sky stretches endlessly, filled with stars so bright they seem close enough to touch. The streams below reflect fragments of moonlight. Trees stand as dark silhouettes against the silver glow of the night. You continue walking. The air is cool now, comfortable. The sounds of the day have faded into softer rhythms. Crickets sing from the grasses. Water moves steadily through the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once and then falls silent. The world feels settled, and that sense of stability is becoming one of the most important forces in human history. Not because people notice it immediately. Most do not. A stable climate is like a reliable friend. You tend to think about it less precisely because it is dependable. The river flows where you expect it to flow. The seasons arrive more or less when expected. Plants return, animals migrate, life develops rhythms, and when rhythms become reliable, human ambition begins to grow. You follow a path along the edge of a broad meadow illuminated by moonlight. The silver grass sways gently in the breeze. The landscape appears almost dreamlike, peaceful enough that it's easy to forget how challenging life still remains. Food must still be gathered. Weather can still bring hardship. Injuries remain dangerous. The future is never guaranteed. Yet compared with the dramatic uncertainties of earlier ages, this world offers something increasingly valuable: predictability. Predictability encourages planning. Planning encourages investment. Investment encourages innovation. The chain reaction unfolds slowly. One generation prepares a little more carefully than the previous one. The next generation expands upon those ideas. Knowledge accumulates, techniques improve, opportunities multiply. You pause beside a small stream. Moonlight dances across the surface. The water seems almost alive. You kneel and listen. The sound is gentle, steady, unchanging. Many of humanity's greatest achievements begin with confidence in the future. Why plant seeds if you expect disaster tomorrow? Why build structures if you assume you will soon abandon them? Why teach specialized skills if survival requires constant movement? Long-term thinking depends upon a certain degree of confidence. Not certainty, confidence. The difference matters. No one living in this period can guarantee what next year will bring, but increasingly, they can make educated expectations. The world rewards preparation more consistently than before. You rise and continue onward. The moonlight reveals a landscape rich with possibility. Small clearings, sheltered groves, reliable waterways, places where people might choose to spend increasing amounts of time, places where ideas can take root. You think about all the innovations that future generations will eventually develop. Agriculture, pottery, permanent architecture, large-scale trade, complex social organization. None of these inventions appear overnight. Each emerges from countless small experiments, and experiments require patience. Imagine a community testing new ways to store food. Some methods fail, others succeed. The successful ones are remembered. The failures become lessons. Over time, experience accumulates. Human societies become increasingly skilled at shaping their environments, not dominating them, not controlling them completely, simply working with them more effectively. The night breeze carries the scent of damp earth and distant vegetation. You walk through a stand of trees where moonlight filters between branches. Leaves shimmer softly overhead. The forest feels alive even in darkness. A rabbit darts briefly across your path before vanishing into the undergrowth. The small encounter makes you smile. Life continues all around you, visible and invisible, known and unknown. As communities grow more confident in their ability to plan ahead, they begin attempting things that would once have seemed impractical. A structure requiring weeks of labour, a storage system intended for future seasons, a shared project involving multiple families. The scale remains modest. The mindset is changing. That mindset may be one of the most important developments of all, the ability to think years ahead rather than merely days ahead. You emerge from the trees onto higher ground. The valley spreads beneath you like a silver tapestry. Streams wind through moonlit grasslands. Mist gathers in low areas. The entire landscape appears calm and orderly. From here, it becomes easier to understand why certain regions became centers of innovation. Stable environments allow knowledge to compound. One improvement builds upon another. One generation starts where the previous generation finished. Progress becomes cumulative. You sit upon a smooth rock overlooking the valley. The stone feels cool beneath you. The night air brushes softly against your face. You imagine people gathering in places like this to discuss plans. Not grand plans involving kingdoms or empires. Simple plans, seasonal plans, practical plans. Where to gather resources, when to travel, how to prepare for the coming year. Yet even simple plans strengthen the habit of long-term thinking, and long-term thinking changes societies. A community capable of preparing for next season eventually becomes capable of preparing for the next decade. The process unfolds gradually, almost invisibly. No single moment announces the transition. No one declares that humanity has entered a new stage of development. People simply continue solving problems, one after another. The cumulative effect becomes extraordinary. You watch the moon reflecting on the water below. The scene feels timeless, and in some ways, it is. Human beings still gather, still plan, still imagine futures not yet visible. The tools have changed, the instinct remains. Far below, the stream continues its journey through the valley. The same stream that provides water, supports life, encourages settlement, connects people to place. Everything is linked together. Climate, landscape, resources, knowledge, human ambition. Each influences the others. The stability of the Holocene does not create civilization by itself. It creates room for civilization to grow. Room for experimentation, room for learning, room for increasingly ambitious projects. The moon climbs higher overhead. Stars fill every corner of the sky. The valley seems quieter now, more peaceful. You stand and begin walking once again. Ahead lies a future filled with larger settlements, more complex communities, and increasingly sophisticated ways of organizing human life. Those developments remain distant, but the foundations are already visible in every stored resource, every shared idea, every carefully planned season, every community willing to invest effort in a future it cannot yet see. As you continue through the moonlit landscape, surrounded by the steady rhythms of a stable world, you can almost sense human ambition growing alongside the forests and rivers, slowly, patiently, one generation at a time. The night slowly gives way to dawn. At first, the change is almost impossible to notice. The stars remain bright overhead. The moon still hangs above the valley. Mist lingers across the grasslands. Then a faint silver glow begins spreading along the eastern horizon. Birds stir within the trees. The darkness softens. A new day arrives. You stand upon a gentle hillside overlooking the landscape that has accompanied you throughout this journey. Streams wind through valleys. Forests cover the slopes beyond. Open meadows catch the first light of morning. The world feels peaceful, stable, predictable. And because of that stability, human communities are beginning to grow larger than ever before. Not cities, not yet, but something closer than any previous generation would have recognized. You begin walking downhill through dew-covered grass. Tiny droplets sparkle in the growing sunlight. The air smells fresh and cool. Every breath carries the scent of earth, water, and vegetation. The valley below contains all the ingredients people increasingly seek: reliable water, productive land, familiar resources, as more communities spend longer periods in favourable locations. Populations gradually increase. Children survive more often. Knowledge accumulates. Settlements become more substantial. The process remains slow enough that nobody living through it experiences a sudden transformation, yet over centuries, the difference becomes unmistakable. You reach a stream crossing where smooth stones allow easy passage. The water flows quietly beneath your feet. Along the bank, patches of wild grain sway in the breeze. Nearby, trees provide shade and building materials. It is easy to see why people might choose to remain here longer than their ancestors once did. The landscape rewards permanence, not absolute permanence, but increasing permanence. You continue toward a broad terrace overlooking the valley floor. The morning sun now illuminates the entire region. Birds fly between stands of trees. Fish ripple the surface of shallow pools. The atmosphere feels alive. A place like this can support more people than a temporary camp, not because the land has changed overnight, because generations have learned how to use it more effectively. Knowledge compounds. Experience compounds. Opportunity compounds. A family discovers a productive fishing area. Their children learn it. Their grandchildren improve upon it. Nearby communities share techniques. The benefits spread outward. The landscape remains the same. Human understanding deepens. You pause beneath a large tree and watch the morning unfold. The leaves shimmer softly overhead. A gentle wind moves through the branches. The sound resembles distant water. Somewhere beyond the valley, other communities are experiencing similar developments, not identical developments. Every region follows its own path, yet the pattern appears again and again. People settle, knowledge grows, communities expand, the future begins taking shape. Far from this valley, traces preserved beneath layers of soil reveal settlements that gradually became larger over generations. What began as favourable locations for repeated visits slowly evolved into places where people invested increasing amounts of labour and attention. No one could see the final outcome. Each generation simply responded to immediate opportunities. Yet those responses accumulated. History often works through accumulation rather than sudden invention. You leave the shade and continue along the valley edge. The sunlight feels pleasantly warm now. The coolness of dawn is fading. Ahead, a cluster of shelters appears in your imagination. Not because you can see them, because it is becoming easier to picture them. Families living near one another, shared storage areas, gathering spaces, children playing beside the stream, people repairing tools beneath the shade of trees. The image feels increasingly realistic. The distance between camp and village is beginning to narrow. You stop near a patch of wildflowers buzzing with insects. Bees move steadily from blossom to blossom. Each follows a simple task. Together, they create something larger. The comparison feels fitting. Human communities often work in much the same way. Individual actions combine into collective outcomes. One person builds, another teaches, another gathers food, another passes knowledge to the next generation. The community becomes stronger than any single individual. As settlements grow, new opportunities appear, specialization becomes possible. Some people devote more time to particular skills: tool making, food preparation, construction, ceremonial activities. The division remains modest compared with later civilizations, but the trend has begun. Larger communities allow greater complexity. Greater complexity creates new possibilities. You continue walking beside the stream. The water sparkles beneath the morning sun. The sound remains calming, steady, reliable. Many of the world's earliest large settlements emerge near dependable water sources. Rivers, springs, lakes, and wetlands repeatedly attracted human activity because they supported both daily life and long-term growth. The pattern appears so often that it almost feels inevitable. Yet nothing was truly inevitable. Different choices remained possible. Different paths remained open. Human history is filled with alternatives that were never taken. You kneel beside the water and watch tiny fish moving through the current. This scene feels ordinary, and that is precisely what makes it important. Civilization does not emerge from extraordinary moments alone. It emerges from countless ordinary moments repeated over generations, a stream visited every day, a field observed every season, a skill taught every year. Routine creates continuity, continuity creates culture. Culture creates community. The chain extends further than anyone realizes. You rise and continue onward. The valley broadens ahead. The land appears increasingly suitable for larger populations. Flat areas for shelter, water for drinking, resources nearby. Everything encourages growth. The first true cities still lie far in the future, yet the foundations are becoming visible. A traveller from an earlier Ice Age world might find these settlements surprisingly familiar and surprisingly different. The tools remain simple, the people remain recognisably human, yet there is a new quality emerging, a stronger sense of place, a deeper investment in the future, a growing expectation that life can be organised around stable locations rather than constant movement. That expectation changes everything. You climb a low rise and look back across the valley. Sunlight covers the landscape, streams glitter, trees sway gently in the breeze. The world appears calm. Beneath that calm, however, humanity is quietly preparing for one of the greatest transitions in its history. Villages are becoming larger, communities are becoming more interconnected, knowledge is spreading farther. The path toward urban life remains long, yet it has already begun, not through conquest, not through grand declarations, through countless practical decisions made by ordinary people responding to a changing world. And as the morning continues across the fertile valleys of the Holocene, you walk onward through the earlier stages of a journey that will eventually lead to towns, cities, and the complex societies that shape the modern world. Centuries pass almost unnoticed. The valley remains. The rivers still wind through the lowlands. Forests continue to cover the hills beyond. The stars rise and fall overhead as they always have, yet generation after generation, small changes accumulate. The child who once learned where fish gathered becomes a parent teaching the same lesson. The parent becomes a grandparent. The grandparent's knowledge passes onward. The faces change. The landscape remains familiar, and little by little, the relationship between people and place grows deeper. Morning sunlight spreads across the valley as another day begins. Smoke rises from several hearths. The smell drifts through cool air carrying hints of wood, drying grain, and damp earth. Dogs move between shelters. Voices carry softly across open ground. Nothing here resembles a city, yet it no longer resembles the temporary camps of earlier ages either. Something new is emerging. You stand on a ridge overlooking the settlement below. Packed earth pathways connect clusters of shelters. Storage areas occupy carefully chosen locations. People move through routines that have become increasingly organised. The scene feels ordinary. That is precisely why it matters. History often advances through ordinary routines repeated thousands of times. The dramatic moments attract attention. The quiet habits change the world. Below, a woman carries a woven basket filled with gathered food. Nearby, someone repairs a tool worn down through constant use. Children chase one another across open ground before being called back toward their families. Life unfolds through familiar rhythms. Those rhythms are becoming more complex. The climate shift that began thousands of years earlier has now woven itself into nearly every aspect of daily existence. Not because people spend their days thinking about climate. They do not. They think about food, families, work, seasons. Yet all those things are connected to the environmental stability that allowed communities to grow. The connection is easy to miss. Like the roots of a tree hidden beneath the soil, you descend toward the settlement. The scent of smoke becomes stronger. A grinding stone sits near one shelter. Nearby, grain is being processed into form easier to store and consume. The sound is steady, stone against stone, a simple rhythm, one repeated countless times across generations. The first farmers did not know they were changing history. They were feeding families, preparing for winter, solving practical problems. Civilization often begins that way, not through grand visions, through practical solutions. A little farther along, clay vessels dry beneath the morning sun, their surfaces catch the light. Some are simple, others show signs of careful craftsmanship. Containers matter, storage matters, the future increasingly matters. When resources can be preserved, time itself begins to feel different. The months ahead become part of today's decisions. You continue through the settlement. People greet one another, tasks overlap, knowledge circulates. An older individual demonstrates a technique to someone younger. No written instructions exist. The lesson passes directly from person to person. The method survives because memory survives. The process feels fragile, yet it proves remarkably durable. Thousands of years later, traces of these activities remain buried beneath layers of soil. A broken pot, a discarded tool, a forgotten hearth. The objects survive, the conversations do not, the voices disappear, the choices remain. The settlement grows quieter as the morning advances. Most people are occupied with work. The atmosphere feels purposeful, not hurried. Purposeful. That distinction is important. Human communities are becoming capable of organizing larger efforts. Fields require planning. Storage requires management. Construction requires cooperation. No single individual can accomplish everything alone. The community becomes a tool as important as any stone blade. You leave the settlement and follow a path toward nearby fields. The ground here bears signs of repeated use. Plants grow in patterns shaped by human decisions. Nature and culture increasingly overlap. The boundary separating them becomes harder to identify. Wild landscapes still surround the valley, yet within certain areas. Human influence is unmistakable. Seeds are planted. Growth is encouraged, resources are managed. The relationship between people and environment has entered a new stage, not domination, partnership, at least for now. A breeze moves across the fields. The grain ripples like water. The sight is calming, beautiful even. What began as careful observation of wild plants has become something far more ambitious. Generations earlier, people watch seeds fall naturally into the soil. Now they actively participate in the process. The lesson learned beside streams and meadows has expanded. Knowledge became practice. Practice became tradition. Tradition became a way of life. You continue walking through the fields. The sun climbs higher. Birds call from distant trees. The valley feels prosperous. Not wealthy in the modern sense. Prosperous in the sense that life has become increasingly organized around reliable production. That reliability changes expectations. A family can plan ahead. A community can prepare for future seasons. Projects requiring long periods of effort become more realistic. The future begins occupying more space in human imagination. Not because people dream differently, because circumstances allow them to. A path leads toward another settlement visible in the distance. That alone is significant. More communities now exist within reach of one another. Interactions become more frequent. Ideas travel more easily. A successful technique developed in one valley may eventually appear in another. The pace remains slow, measured in seasons and lifetimes rather than days. Still, the movement never truly stops. Human knowledge spreads the same way rivers spread water, gradually, persistently, across great distances. You pause atop a small rise between settlements. From here, the wider transformation becomes visible. Fields, pathways, shelters, storage areas, people moving through landscapes increasingly shaped by human intention. The climate shift that began 11,700 years ago no longer appears as a distant environmental event. Its effects surround you. The warming encouraged stability. Stability encouraged settlement. Settlement encouraged experimentation. Experimentation encouraged growth. Each step connected to the next. The chain stretches across thousands of years, and now the results are becoming unmistakable. As the afternoon sunlight spreads across the valleys below, you stand at a moment when humanity is no longer merely adapting to the world around it. Humanity is beginning, carefully and gradually, to reshape that world in return. The afternoon opens wide before you. From the rise where you stand, the valley no longer feels like a single place. It feels like part of a much larger world. Rivers stretch beyond sight. Paths cross open ground. Smoke rises from distant settlements in thin blue-grey lines. Forests cover the higher slopes, while fields and clearings spread across the lower land. You have followed this story from cold grasslands and wandering herds to rivers, seeds, settlements, animals, trade, storage, planning, and the first steps toward larger communities. Now the view expands. The change that began around 11,700 years ago did not touch only one valley. It echoed across the ancient world, not in exactly the same way everywhere, not at the same speed, not with the same results, but again and again in different regions. People began responding to the warmer and more stable Holocene climate with new ways of living. You begin walking down the slope as sunlight warms the earth beneath your feet. The grass is dry here, pale at the tips, rustling softly around your legs. In the distance, a dog barks near a settlement. Somewhere nearby, grain is being ground against stone, producing that patient scraping rhythm that seems to belong to the beginning of every settled morning. The valley smells of smoke, warm soil, and drying plants. It is a comfortable smell, a lived-in smell. Yet beyond this valley, other landscapes tell their own versions of the same transformation. In the Fertile Crescent, wild grains grew across hills and plains where people observed, gathered, and eventually cultivated them. Along great river systems, reliable water supported larger populations. In parts of China, communities began working with millet and rice. In the highlands of New Guinea, people experimented with local plants. In the Americas, different societies would eventually cultivate maize, squash, beans, potatoes, and other crops suited to their own environments. The story is not one invention spreading neatly from a single source. It is more like many small fires being lit in different places. Some burn brightly, some fade, some grow slowly until they illuminate entire regions. You cross a shallow stream. The water is cool around your ankles. Smooth stones shift slightly beneath your feet. On the far bank, a narrow path continues toward a cluster of shelters. Their frames are made from wood and reeds, with coverings shaped by local materials. Nothing is standardized. Nothing is mass-produced. Every structure reflects the land around it. A home near a river looks different from a home near a mountain. A shelter in a forested region differs from one built on an open plain. People use what the world provides. That simple truth shapes architecture long before architecture has a name. You pass a shelter where clay is drying in the sun. Nearby, baskets rest beneath an overhang. A child sits close to an older woman, watching her hands work plant fibers into a useful shape. The lesson is quiet, no lecture, no written manual, just watching, copying, correcting, and trying again. This is how much of human knowledge survives, hand to hand, voice to voice, day to day. It seems fragile, and in some ways it is, yet it can endure for centuries. You move farther into the settlement. A few people work near storage pits lined carefully to keep food safe from damp and animals. Others sort plant material. Someone sharpens a tool with slow, practiced movements. The sound is faint but precise, stone against stone, a spark of skill passed down from people whose names are lost. Far away, in other valleys and river basins, similar scenes are unfolding with different tools, different plants, different customs, and different languages. No one here knows of those distant communities. No messenger arrives with news from across continents. And yet the broad pattern feels familiar. People are settling. People are planning. People are changing their relationship with the land. Some answers have vanished with the people themselves. No one left a written explanation of why one community chose to cultivate certain plants, while another remained mobile. No one recorded the conversation when a family decided to stay in one place a little longer than before. The reasons must be reconstructed from fragments. A burnt seed, a worn grinding stone, a post hole in ancient soil, a storage pit, a bone from an animal living closer to humans than its wild ancestors once did. The past speaks softly. You have to listen patiently. You leave the settlement and follow a path toward open fields. The plants sway beneath the afternoon light. Their movement resembles water, wave after wave passing across the valley. Birds rise briefly, then settle again among the stalks. It is peaceful, almost too peaceful for the scale of change it represents. These fields are not simply places where food grows. They are evidence of a new relationship between time and labor. Seeds are planted with trust. Harvests are expected with patience. Food is stored with the assumption that tomorrow can be prepared for. This may sound ordinary to us, because our lives are built upon such assumptions. We store food, save money, schedule appointments, plan holidays, and occasionally forget where we put the charger, which is perhaps the most modern form of wilderness survival. But here, this confidence in the future is still young, still forming, still uncertain. You continue walking until the fields give way to a broad pathway used by many feet. It leads toward another settlement beyond the trees. Along the way, you notice small objects scattered in the dust, a broken stone flake, a bead made from shell, a fragment of pottery. The shell catches your attention. There is no sea nearby. Someone carried it inland, perhaps through direct travel, perhaps through exchange from hand to hand. By the time it reached this valley, it may have passed through several communities, each one adding its own small piece to the journey. Objects move. Ideas move with them. A shell is never only a shell. It can be decoration, memory, status, gift, connection. A reminder that even before roads and writing, people were already linking distant places through movement and exchange. You reach the shade of a stand of trees. The air cools immediately. Leaves rustle overhead. The smell changes from dry grass to bark, shade, and damp soil for a moment. You remember the earlier forests you walked through, when the warming world first began turning greener. Those forests did more than change the scenery. They offered wood, fuel, shelter, animals, fruits, nuts, and pathways of their own. Everything returns: the rivers, the forests, the seeds, the animals, the fires, the gatherings. Each part of the story has been waiting for this moment. When the pieces begin to fit together, you emerge from the trees near a riverbank where people have gathered in the late afternoon. Some sit near the water, others prepare food. Children splash quietly in the shallows while adults watch from nearby. Smoke rises from a hearth, carrying the scent of cooking into the warm air. The scene is gentle, human, deeply ordinary, and yet from such ordinary scenes, the ancient world begins to transform. River valleys will become centers of dense settlement. Agricultural communities will grow. Trade routes will expand. Ritual spaces will become more elaborate. Social roles will multiply. The first cities still lie ahead, but the habits that make them possible are already present. living together, planning together, remembering together, working with the rhythms of land and water. You sit for a while near the river, the sunlight lowers, the current reflects gold and pale blue. A breeze moves across the surface, breaking the reflection into shimmering fragments, somewhere upstream. Another community prepares for evening, somewhere downstream. Another child learns a task that will one day feel ancient, across the world, in separate valleys and distant highlands. People are making different choices under the same broad sky. The climate shift did not write a single destiny for humanity. It opened a door, many doors, perhaps, and through them. Human communities stepped in their own ways. As evening gathers softly around the river, you begin to understand that civilization did not rise from one place alone, or from one decision, or from one invention. It rose from echoes, echoes across valleys, echoes across generations, echoes of warming air, flowing water, patient hands, and remembered knowledge. And those echoes are now spreading across the ancient world. Evening settles over the river, and the world grows quiet again. The last light of day lingers on the water in long, trembling bands of gold. Smoke rises from hearths along the bank. Voices soften as work comes to an end. Children are called closer to the shelters. Dogs curl near warm places. Somewhere, grain is being covered for the night. Tools are being put away, and the small routines of survival become the small routines of home. You stand near the river and look back across the long path you have travelled. You remember the cold edges of the fading ice age. You remember the first warming after the Younger Dryas. You remember forests spreading across hillsides, rivers swelling with meltwater, shorelines slowly retreating beneath rising seas. You remember the herds moving across open valleys. You remember seeds held carefully in human hands. You remember camps becoming familiar places becoming settlements, and settlements becoming the first quiet hints of a world that would one day contain cities. Nothing about this transformation was sudden. No single morning announced that civilization had begun. No voice rang across the valley saying that humanity had entered a new chapter. The change came softly, like dawn, like water wearing smooth stone, like footsteps making a path across grass, because people walk the same way again and again. The climate shift around 11,700 years ago did not build villages by itself. It didn't plant every field or shape every tool. It did not teach people to store food, gather in larger groups, exchange ideas, or form deeper bonds with the land. People did those things, patiently, creatively, sometimes awkwardly. Because humanity has always had a talent for brilliant ideas and small daily confusion in roughly equal measure. But the warming world gave those efforts a new setting. A more stable climate made planning easier. Reliable seasons made observation more rewarding. Rivers, forests, wetlands, and grasslands became dependable enough for long relationships to form between people and place. And once those relationships formed, the future began to change. You walk slowly along the riverbank. The ground is cool beneath your feet. Reeds move softly in the evening breeze. The smell of smoke mixes with damp earth and the faint sweetness of drying plants. Nearby, people gather around a low fire. The flames flicker orange against the deepening blue of dusk. Faces glow in the firelight. Hands pass food. A quiet laugh rises and disappears. The scene is simple. It contains no palace, no market square, no written law, no bronze bell, no wheel turning on a road, yet something essential is already here. Community, memory, planning, trust, a shared life shaped by a shared landscape. These are the quiet foundations upon which later civilizations will rest. Long after this evening fades, other valleys will grow busier, settlements will expand, fields will stretch farther, Animals will be tended more closely. Trade will carry shells, stones, pottery, stories, and customs from one place to another. Some communities will remain small, others will become large. Some will disappear without leaving more than a few fragments in the soil. Others will become ancestors of famous ancient worlds. But all of them belong to the larger human story that began shifting when the climate itself changed. You turn from the river and look toward the fields beyond the settlement in the low light. The plants appear almost silver. They sway gently as the evening wind passes through them. Every stalk represents a relationship between human effort and natural growth. Every stored basket of food represents faith in tomorrow. Every shelter represents the idea that a place can matter enough to return to, repair, and remember. That idea is powerful. Home is not merely a structure. Home is a pattern of return, a place where stories gather, a place where children learn what the older generation knows, a place where the world becomes familiar enough to be trusted. Across thousands of years, this trust will become one of humanity's strongest tools. People will learn to shape rivers, plant fields, build walls, mark seasons, measure land, and imagine futures far beyond their own lifetimes. Some of those futures will be beautiful, some will be difficult. Civilization will bring comfort, cooperation, art, music, writing, and medicine. It will also bring inequality, crowding, conflict, and the occasional committee meeting, which may be one of the oldest signs that complexity has gone too far. Still, the journey begins here, in the quiet spaces before cities, with people watching seasons, sharing food, returning to water, listening to elders, teaching children, learning what the land will give and what it asks in return. You walk toward the edge of the settlement. A woman folds a hide near the entrance of a shelter. A child carries a small bundle of sticks. Someone checks a storage pit before covering it carefully. The gestures are ordinary, but ordinary gestures, repeated across centuries, become history. The climate shift did not create a perfect world. No age has ever been perfect. The Holocene still contained droughts, storms, floods, and hardship. People still faced hunger, illness, loss, and uncertainty. But compared with the unstable climate swings of earlier periods, this new age offered something unusual, a long season of relative steadiness. And within that steadiness, human beings began to experiment with permanence. You pause beside the fire. Warmth touches your hands, sparks rise into the darkening air and vanish among the first stars. No one here knows that future generations will call this time prehistoric. No one knows that scientists will one day study ice cores, pollen grains, ancient seeds, bones, and buried hearths to understand the world they inhabited. No one knows that modern people, lying in warm beds beneath electric lights, will listen to stories about them and wonder how they lived. To themselves, they are not ancient. They are simply alive. They are simply doing what people have always done, trying to understand the world, trying to care for one another, trying to make tomorrow a little more secure than today. The river continues flowing through the twilight. It has carried meltwater, reflected forests, nourished camps, and guided settlements. It will keep flowing after everyone here is gone. It will remember nothing, and yet, in its own way, it will keep the story moving. You look once more across the valley. The sky's dark now, except for a thin glow near the horizon. The fields rest. The fires burn low. The voices grow softer. The climate shift that began 11,700 years ago has done its quiet work. It changed landscapes. It changed possibilities. It changed the rhythm of human life. And from those changes came villages, farming, monuments, trade, cities, and eventually the vast, complicated, restless world that you know. But here, at the beginning, everything remains calm. A river, a fire, a settlement breathing gently under the stars, and humanity, still young in its settled life, dreaming beside the water. The night deepens. The river becomes a dark ribbon beneath the stars, moving quietly through the valley as it has all evening, as it will through the long hours ahead. The fires are smaller now. Their glow rests low against the earth. Smoke rises slowly, then disappears into the cool night air. You can let the details soften. The fields no longer need to be studied. The shelters no longer need to be counted. The tools, the baskets, the hearths, the paths between homes, all of them can fade into the gentle darkness. Only the feeling remains, a world changed, but not hurried, a people learning, but not yet aware of how far their learning will go, a climate settling into rhythms that allow human dreams to stretch a little farther into tomorrow. Somewhere, a child is asleep beside the warmth of a shelter. Somewhere, an older voice lowers into silence after telling one last story. Somewhere beyond the trees, an animal moves quietly through the grass. The valley holds all of it without effort. The river carries the night onward, and you can rest now in the thought that history is not always loud. Sometimes it begins with warmth after cold, with seeds in a hand, with smoke above a river, with footsteps returning to the same place until the place becomes home. The stars remain overhead. The air is cool and still. The ancient world breathes softly around you. And as the last glow of the hearth fades into embers, the long story of humanity continues beyond sight, quiet, patient, and peaceful as sleep. Sweet dreams.